After my divorce, I lost everything: my home, my savings, and my dignity. But it was my daughter's words that broke me completely. She looked me in the eye and said, "Nobody will ever want you again." Those words shattered me, but they also ignited something deep inside. You will regret saying that I promised myself, determined to prove her wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Norman Hayes. I am 69 years old, and for 4 decades I built a life I thought was unshakable. I was the silent force behind a highly successful logistics and transportation company. I engineered the software that routed our trucks across the country while my wife Valerie handled the public face of the business. I preferred working in the background, staying up late into the night, writing code and optimizing routes so our drivers could get home to their families safely. Valerie loved the spotlight, the expensive dinners, and the luxury cars. I thought we were a perfect team, balancing each other out. I was completely wrong. It happened on a cold Tuesday morning inside a sterile law office in downtown Atlanta. I sat across a heavy mahogany table staring at the final divorce decree. Valerie sat opposite me wearing a designer suit I had paid for, sporting a triumphant smirk that made my stomach turn. Through a complex web of deceit, hidden bank accounts she opened under different corporate names, and an army of ruthless lawyers, she had legally backed me into a corner. The settlement stripped me of the company I built from the ground up, and the beautiful home I had literally laid the foundation for 30 years ago. I picked up the pen and signed my name, relinquishing everything to avoid a prolonged legal battle that would have drained whatever little sanity I had left. Standing right behind Valerie was our 35-year-old daughter, Kendra. Next to Kendra stood her husband, Bradley, a 38-year-old white man who always carried an air of unearned superiority. Bradley fancied himself a tech entrepreneur, but he had never built a successful company in his life. He just knew how to spend my money to fund his delusions. Neither of them offered me a sympathetic glance. They looked at me as if I were a stranger who had overstayed his welcome. The court gave me exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises, 2 days to pack 40 years of memories into a few cheap plastic garbage bags. I walked through the halls of that sprawling house, touching the oak door frames I had sanded and stained with my own 2 hands. I remembered carrying Kendra on my shoulders through these very corridors when she was just a little girl. I remembered working exhausting 18-hour shifts, pulling double duty so she could attend an exclusive private college debt-free. I paid for her lavish wedding to Bradley, a wedding that cost more than my first 2 trucks combined. I gave them everything I had to give. And now I was leaving with nothing. As I dragged my heavy bags toward the front door, Valerie, Kendra, and Bradley stood in the foyer. They were already discussing renovation plans for my home. Valerie wanted to tear down my home office to build a larger entertainment room. I swallowed my pride, holding back the bile rising in my throat. I looked at the daughter I had sacrificed my youth for, hoping to find just a fraction of the love I had poured into her. "Kendra," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The court froze my personal accounts until next month. I need a little time to get on my feet. Can I stay in your guest room just for a few weeks until I secure a small apartment?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Bradley scoffed a sharp, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged hallway. He adjusted his expensive watch and looked away, pretending to be bored by my desperation. Kendra crossed her arms over her chest. She looked me up and down, taking in my worn-out jeans and my faded work shirt. Her eyes held no warmth, no trace of the little girl who used to call me her hero. "No," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "We cannot have you staying with us. Bradley is hosting important investors this month, and we need the house to look perfect. You moving in with your trash bags does not fit our image." I felt a physical pain in my chest, as if she had driven a knife directly between my ribs. "Kendra, I am your father. I paid for that house you live in. I just need a couple of weeks to figure things out." She stepped closer to me, her expression hardening into a mask of pure cruelty. "Look at yourself," she whispered sharply. "You are pathetic. You let Mom take everything because you were too weak to fight back. You have no money, no house, no power. You are a failure. Nobody will ever want you again." Her words hung in the cold air, slicing through me with surgical precision. Nobody will ever want you again. My own flesh and blood, the child I had given everything to, had just evaluated my entire worth based solely on my bank account. Because I was currently stripped of my assets, I was no longer a father to her. I was just a liability, a stain on her perfect life. Valerie stepped forward, holding out her perfectly manicured hand. "Leave the keys, Norman. You are trespassing on my property." I did not yell. I did not cry. Decades of working in the harsh logistics industry had taught me how to handle immense pressure. I slowly reached into my pocket, pulled out the heavy brass keys, and dropped them onto the marble floor. They landed with a sharp clatter that finalized the end of my family. I looked at Valerie, then at Bradley, and finally at Kendra. You will regret saying that I promised my voice dangerously calm. I turned my back on the people who had just discarded me like garbage and walked out the front door. I loaded my plastic bags into the back of my old rusted pickup truck, the only vehicle the court allowed me to keep. I turned the key in the ignition, and the old engine sputtered to life. The drive was a blur of neon lights and dark streets. Rain began to tap against the windshield, matching the rhythm of my racing heart. I drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, where the neon sign flickered and the wallpaper peeled in the corners. I carried my bags inside, locked the thin wooden door, and sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at the stained carpet. Kendra thought I was a broken old man. Valerie thought she had outsmarted me and won the ultimate prize. Bradley thought he could finally leech off my company without my interference. They were all celebrating my demise right at that very moment, toasting with expensive champagne bought with my hard-earned money. But there was one crucial detail they had all overlooked in their arrogant haste. A detail that would soon become their absolute worst nightmare. Valerie had employed the best divorce lawyers money could buy to steal the logistics company. She successfully claimed ownership of the trucks, the warehouses, the brand name, and the client lists. But she forgot how the company actually ran. She forgot that 20 years ago, I personally wrote and copyrighted the proprietary routing software that kept the entire business operational. And more importantly, she did not know about the massive commercial plot of land the headquarters sat on. A plot of land I had quietly purchased under an anonymous private trust decades ago. The divorce decree gave her the company, but it did not give her the land it stood on nor the software that made it function. They thought I was an empty shell, a man who had lost his claws. They thought they could humiliate me and cast me aside without facing any consequences. But my silence in that foyer was not a surrender. It was a calculation. I wiped the dust off my old laptop, placed it on the small motel desk, and opened a secure, encrypted file. I am an engineer. I build complex systems and I fix broken things. Right now, my family was a broken system, and I needed to dismantle it completely. It was time to show them exactly what happens when you push a quiet man into a corner and underestimate the mind that built an empire from nothing. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. My new reality was a cramped studio apartment in a decaying building on the east side of Atlanta. The ceiling leaked a steady drop of water into a plastic bucket, and the heater rattled with a noise that sounded like a dying engine. I sat at a wobbly folding table eating a cup of cheap instant noodles. It was a far cry from the prime rib dinners Valerie used to host, but my stomach did not care about pride. Despite the squalor, my mind was entirely focused on the glowing screen of my old laptop. I was tracking the routing algorithms of the logistics company. They had legally taken the business, but they forgot to revoke my administrative access to the back-end systems I had coded myself. I watched their delivery trucks light up on the digital map, noting the inefficiencies that were already creeping into the supply chain without my daily oversight. They were losing money, and they did not even realize it yet. I took a bite of the salty broth when a heavy fist pounded on the thin wooden door. The knocks were loud, entitled, and impatient. I did not move immediately. I closed my laptop screen, setting it aside. I wiped my mouth with a paper towel and stood up, bracing my tired knees. When I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, the cold wind blew in, carrying the smell of damp asphalt and expensive cologne. Bradley stood in the hallway. He wore a tailored navy suit, a silk tie, and a smug smile that made my hands instinctively clench into fists. He did not wait for an invitation. He pushed past me, walking into the tiny apartment, and looked around with an expression of pure, undisguised disgust. "This place is an absolute dump, Norman," Bradley said, brushing a speck of imaginary dust off his jacket sleeve. "I guess this is what happens when you do not know how to play the game. You spend 40 years building an empire just to end up living like a rat in a cage." I closed the door slowly, keeping my expression blank. What do you want, Bradley? I do not have anything left for you or Valerie to steal. You have the house, you have the bank accounts, you have the trucks. Bradley chuckled a dry sound without any real humor. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, tossing them onto the folding table right next to my cup of noodles. Not everything, Norman. You still hold a 5% honorary stake in the logistics company. Valerie wants a clean break, and my new tech startup needs the company portfolio to look completely unified for our Series A funding round. Investors do not like loose ends, and right now you are a very ugly, very inconvenient loose end. I looked at the papers and then at the man who had married my daughter. Bradley had never worked a hard day in his life. He grew up with a trust fund and burned through it with 2 failed app ventures before latching on to Kendra. He saw my business, the one I bled for, as a personal piggy bank to fund his Silicon Valley delusions. I crossed my arms across my chest, refusing to be intimidated in my own home. Those shares were part of the court agreement, Bradley. They are my only remaining dividend. I am not signing them away so you can play CEO with my money. Valerie and you took the company, but I am keeping my shares. Bradley took a step closer, his height towering over me. He leaned in, his pale face turning slightly red with irritation. You do not seem to understand your position, old man. You are not negotiating from a corner office anymore. You do not get to dictate terms. You are standing in a ghetto apartment eating garbage. You will sign these papers today because Valerie and I demand it. If you refuse, we will bury you in endless litigation until you cannot even afford that cup of noodles. I stood my ground. My voice remained entirely steady, a stark contrast to his rising temper. Get out of my house, Bradley. You have no power here. You might have manipulated the divorce courts, but you cannot force my signature. Go back to Kendra and tell her I said no. The arrogant smirk returned to his face, but this time it was incredibly malicious. No power. He asked softly, stepping even closer. Let me paint a picture for you, Norman. Little Leo asks about his grandpa every single day. He wonders why you are not around to play catch or help with his math homework. He cries when he goes to bed because he thinks he did something wrong. Kendra tells him you are sick. I tell him you simply do not care about him anymore. I tell him his grandfather abandoned him because he is a selfish failure. Hearing my grandson mentioned sent a violent jolt of raw anger through my veins. Leo was 7 years old. He was the absolute light of my life. I spent every weekend teaching him how to build model airplanes and reading him stories. He was the only pure thing left in that family. Keep Leo out of this, I warned, my tone dropping a dangerous octave. Do not use a child to fight your battles. Bradley laughed, a cruel, calculating sound. Oh, Leo is very much in this. Much. Kendra and I have decided that your current living situation and your declining mental state make you an unfit presence in our son's life. If you do not sign these papers right now, I will make sure you never see your grandson again. We will file for a restraining order. No holidays, no birthdays, no phone calls. You will be completely erased from his memory, and he will grow up thinking you hated him. The sheer cruelty of using a child as a bargaining chip was staggering. They were willing to break a 7-year-old boy's heart just to secure 5% of a company they had already stolen. It was a new low even for a parasite like Bradley. You are a coward, I said, looking him dead in the eye, refusing to back down. You hide behind dirty lawyers, you hide behind my daughter, and now you are hiding behind a little boy. You have never built anything of value in your entire life, and you never will. You are nothing but a thief dressed in a nice suit. Bradley's eyes widened in sudden, unhinged fury. The polite corporate facade cracked completely. He lunged forward, grabbing the collar of my faded work shirt. I was 69 years old, and the decades of heavy physical labor had worn down my joints. I could have fought back. I knew how to throw a punch. But I also knew that if I left a mark on him, he would call the police and I would be arrested for assault. I had to play the long game. Bradley shoved me hard against the wall. I lost my footing and crashed to the cheap linoleum floor, my shoulder slamming brutally into the edge of the folding table. The cup of noodles tipped over, spilling hot, salty broth and noodles across the floor and splashing over the legal documents. Look at yourself, Bradley spat, standing over me while I gasped for air, clutching my bruised shoulder. You are pathetic. You are a weak old man who lost his empire. Sign the damn papers and send them to my office by tomorrow morning. If you do not, you can consider yourself dead to Kendra and Leo. Do not test me, Norman. He turned on his heel and walked out, slamming the door so hard the flimsy walls of the apartment shook. I lay on the floor for a long moment, listening to the sound of his expensive leather shoes echoing down the hallway. My shoulder throbbed with a dull, agonizing pain. I did not cry. Crying was for people who had accepted defeat, and I had absolutely not surrendered. I took a slow, deep breath, ignoring the sharp ache in my bones, and pushed myself up from the cold linoleum. I grabbed a towel from the tiny kitchenette and began wiping the spilled broth off the floor and the legal documents Bradley had thrown. As I dried the thick stack of papers, my initial intention was to throw them straight into the garbage. But as I wiped the final page, my eyes caught something on the signature line. It was a notarized stamp from the logistics company, an official corporate seal approving the transfer of shares. I paused wiping the paper and brought it closer to the flickering overhead light. I am an engineer. My entire career was built on noticing microscopic flaws in highly complex systems. I knew the corporate seal of my company better than I knew the back of my own hand because I had personally designed it 20 years ago when Valerie and I first registered the business. The seal stamped on Bradley's document was an incredible replica. It was nearly perfect, but it was missing one tiny, deliberate imperfection. When I designed the original stamp, I embedded a microscopic gap in the outer ring of the logo, a silent security measure to prevent exactly this kind of fraud. The stamp on Bradley's document was completely solid. It was flawless. Too flawless. It was a forgery. My mind raced, firing on all cylinders as I connected the dots. If Bradley and Valerie were using a forged corporate seal to force me out of my remaining shares, what else had they forged during the divorce proceedings? The sudden appearance of hidden offshore accounts, the miraculous transfer of assets, the unbelievably swift court rulings, it all clicked into place. They had not just outsmarted me with good lawyers, they had committed federal fraud. Bradley thought he had just intimidated a helpless old man into submission. He thought he had backed me into a corner by threatening to take away my grandson. Instead, his arrogance had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle his entire life. I neatly folded the forged document, making sure not to smudge the ink, and slipped it safely into my jacket pocket. I did not need to cry, and I did not need to beg. I needed to see a lawyer. The real war was just beginning. After my divorce, I lost everything: my home, my savings, and my dignity. But it was my daughter's words that broke me completely. She looked me in the eye and said, "Nobody will ever want you again." Those words shattered me, but they also ignited something deep inside. You will regret saying that I promised myself determined to prove her wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I ignored Bradley's threat entirely. A man who forged corporate seals to steal from an old man did not dictate where I could or could not go. It was a Thursday afternoon, and my 7-year-old grandson Leo was performing in his elementary school spring play. For months before the divorce turned my life upside down, I had helped Leo practice his lines in my garage while I fixed old radios. He was playing a wise old owl, and he had been so proud of his costume. I promised him I would be in the front row. I was not going to let a fraudulent piece of paper or my daughter's cruelty break a promise I made to a little boy. I opened my small closet in the damp apartment and pulled out the best clothes I had left: a faded gray suit jacket that had survived the purge and a clean white button-down shirt. They were not the tailored Italian suits I used to wear to board meetings, but they were clean and pressed. I drove my rusted pickup truck across town to the affluent suburb where Kendra and Bradley lived. The parking lot of the private elementary school was a sea of luxury SUVs and imported sports cars. My old truck stuck out like a sore thumb, a loud, rattling reminder of my current financial exile. I parked in the back, ignoring the judgmental stares of a few wealthy mothers in tennis gear, and walked toward the school auditorium. The room was packed with parents holding expensive cameras and chatting loudly. I slipped through the double doors and found a spot standing quietly in the very back near the exit. I did not want to cause a scene, I just wanted to see my grandson. When the heavy velvet curtains opened, my heart swelled with a pride I had not felt in months. There was Leo standing bravely near the center of the stage, wearing a brown outfit covered in felt feathers. He delivered his lines perfectly, his small voice echoing clearly across the auditorium. I smiled, a genuine warm smile that briefly chased away the cold reality of my ruined life. Then the doors to my left swung open. Kendra and Valerie walked in. They were 20 minutes late. Valerie wore a sharp crimson designer dress, and Kendra was draped in a tailored beige outfit, holding a designer handbag that cost more than my first year of college tuition. They paused at the entrance, scanning the crowd for seats. That was when Kendra's eyes locked onto me. I saw the immediate flash of recognition followed instantly by a visceral wave of disgust. She did not see her father, the man who had paid for the very handbag she was clutching. She saw a threat to her carefully curated social image. She leaned over and whispered something sharply into Valerie's ear. Valerie looked at me, her face hardening into a mask of pure contempt. I stood my ground, keeping my hands in my pockets, focusing my attention back on Leo. But Kendra was not going to simply ignore me. She wanted to make a statement. She wanted to enforce the boundary Bradley had threatened me with the night before. She marched down the side aisle, the clicking of her expensive heels loud enough to draw the attention of several parents nearby. She did not approach me privately. She walked straight past me toward a pair of uniformed school security guards standing near the hallway entrance. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, and her voice rang out sharp and incredibly loud, echoing over the soft background music of the school play. "Excuse me," she shouted, making sure the surrounding rows of parents could hear every single syllable. "You need to remove this man immediately. This homeless old man is bothering my son." The entire back half of the auditorium went dead silent. Dozens of heads turned in my direction. Wealthy doctors, lawyers, and corporate executives stared at me with a mixture of shock and disdain. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, an overwhelming wave of public humiliation that burned deeper than any physical blow. "Ma'am, do you know this man?" one of the security guards asked, placing a hand on his radio. "No," Kendra lied, her voice dripping with venom. "I have never seen him before in my life. He just wandered in from the street and he is staring at the children. My husband and I pay $50,000 a year in tuition so our son does not have to be exposed to vagrants. Get him out of here right now." Valerie stood a few feet away, watching the entire spectacle with a satisfied smirk. She was thoroughly enjoying my public execution. The two heavy-set security guards approached me, their expressions tense. "Sir, you need to step outside right now," one of them demanded, grabbing my upper arm with a firm, unrelenting grip. I did not raise my voice. I did not want to ruin the play for the other children. "I am just here to watch my grandson," I said quietly, looking past the guards to where Kendra stood. "Kendra, tell them who I am." Kendra crossed her arms, lifting her chin defiantly. "I told you I do not know him," she said loudly. "Remove him before I call the police." The second guard grabbed my other arm. "That is it, buddy. Let's go." They yanked me forward, forcing me to stumble. The faded fabric of my suit jacket stretched as they dragged me toward the double doors. I could have fought them. I could have shouted the truth to the entire room. I could have humiliated Kendra right back. But then I heard a small, broken voice from the stage. "Grandpa." The play had paused. Leo was standing at the edge of the stage, his big brown eyes filled with tears. He had seen the commotion. He had seen the guards grab me. My 7-year-old grandson was watching the man he idolized being treated like a dangerous criminal and thrown out into the street. My heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. I stopped resisting the guards immediately. I did not want Leo to see a fight. I did not want him to be traumatized by violence. I caught his eye across the sea of staring parents and gave him a small, reassuring nod. I managed a weak smile, trying to tell him without words that everything would be okay. Then I turned my gaze to Kendra. She was staring at me, her chest heaving slightly, a smug look of victory painted across her face. I did not blink. I stared directly into her eyes and let her see the absolute void where my fatherly love used to be. I let her see the cold, calculating machine she had just activated. The guards shoved me through the doors, pushing me out into the harsh afternoon sunlight. They escorted me all the way to my rusted truck, making sure I got in and started the engine. "Do not ever come back here," the guard warned, slapping the hood of my truck. "If we see you on this property again, you are leaving in the back of a police cruiser." I drove out of the parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sting of public humiliation radiated through my entire body. I had been paraded as a vagrant, a homeless predator, in front of my own flesh and blood. Kendra had looked at me as if I were a disease she needed to eradicate. Valerie had smiled while my grandson cried. I parked my truck on the side of a busy street miles away from the school and killed the engine. I sat in the stifling heat of the cab, listening to the traffic rush by. For 40 years I had played the role of the silent provider. I had absorbed every insult, every demand, every ungrateful remark because I believed family was sacred. I believed a father was supposed to sacrifice his pride for his children. But Kendra had just proven that she was not my daughter anymore. She was a liability. She was an enemy who had aligned herself with thieves and frauds. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out the forged document Bradley had thrown at me the night before. I traced the edge of the fake corporate seal with my thumb. The time for playing defense was officially over. I was not going to absorb the blows anymore. I was going to strike back, and I was going to dismantle their stolen empire piece by piece until they had absolutely nothing left. I started the truck again and pulled out into the traffic. I did not drive back to the damp, leaky apartment. I drove straight downtown into the heart of the city where the towering glass buildings cast long shadows over the streets. I navigated toward a small, modest brick building wedged between a pawn shop and a diner. It was a free legal aid clinic funded by the state for low-income citizens. I could not afford a high-priced corporate firm right now, but I did not need a team of expensive suits. I just needed one hungry, sharp lawyer who knew how to spot a lie. I parked the truck and walked through the glass doors. The waiting room was crowded with desperate people looking for a lifeline. I walked up to the receptionist, pulled the forged document from my pocket, and set it firmly on the counter. "I need to speak to your best fraud attorney," I said, my voice devoid of any hesitation. "I have a case that is going to put a millionaire in federal prison. After my divorce, I lost everything: my home, my savings, and my dignity. But it was my daughter's words that broke me completely. She looked me in the eye and said, 'Nobody will ever want you again.' Those words shattered me, but they also ignited something deep inside. You will regret saying that I promised myself, determined to prove her wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth." The waiting room of the legal aid clinic smelled of cheap coffee and despair. I bypassed the plastic chairs and walked directly to the receptionist. I placed the forged document face down on the scratched laminate counter. "I need to see your sharpest fraud attorney," I said, my voice steady. "I have a case involving corporate forgery and millions in stolen assets." The young woman behind the desk looked at my faded work shirt and exhausted face. She sighed, ready to dismiss me as just another delusional old man down on his luck. "Please, sir," she said, "we only handle basic civil disputes and evictions. You need an appointment." I leaned closer. "Tell whoever is in charge that I have proof of a federal felony committed by the CEO of a major tech startup. If they do not want the case, I will take it to the press." 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Oliver Reyes. Oliver was a 45-year-old Hispanic lawyer with tired eyes, a loosened tie, and a desk buried under mountains of case files. He looked like a man who worked 80-hour weeks fighting losing battles for people who could not pay him. He eyed me skeptically as I sat down. Oliver picked up the document Bradley had thrown at me. He scanned the text and then looked at the corporate seal stamped at the bottom. "This looks like a standard transfer of shares," Mr. Hayes Oliver said, tossing the paper back across the desk. "Your son-in-law wants your remaining 5%. Unless you can prove you were coerced, I do not see a federal crime here." I slid the paper back toward him, tapping my thick index finger exactly on the outer edge of the stamped ink. "I am the man who built the logistics company," I explained. 20 years ago, when we registered the corporation, I personally designed this seal. I am an engineer, Mr. Reyes. I do not trust lawyers, and I do not trust paper. So I built a microscopic flaw into the original design. A tiny, deliberate break in the outer ring of the circle. A security measure. Oliver leaned forward, suddenly interested. He pulled a magnifying glass from his top drawer and hovered it over the black ink. "Look at the outer ring," I instructed. "The stamp on this document is a perfect, unbroken circle. It is a flawless digital reproduction. Bradley had it fabricated because he could not get the real physical stamp from the corporate vault. This is a forged document." Oliver lowered the magnifying glass. The skepticism vanished from his face, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a lawyer who just smelled blood in the water. He turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. "Give me your social security number and the exact dates of your divorce proceedings," he demanded. "If your ex-wife and your son-in-law used a forged seal to extort your remaining shares, I want to see what else they forged when they stripped your assets last month." For the next 30 minutes, the only sound in the cramped office was the frantic clicking of Oliver's keyboard. I sat perfectly still, watching the screen reflect in his dark eyes. I knew Valerie was ruthless. I knew she had meticulously planned the divorce to leave me with nothing. But what Oliver was pulling up from the public court records was about to expose a level of betrayal I had not even considered. Oliver stopped typing. He took a slow breath and turned the monitor so I could see the screen. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me about your private retirement fund." I frowned, staring at the document displayed on the screen. It was a financial disclosure form from my divorce. "I had a private high-yield investment account," I said. "I built it quietly over 30 years. It was my safety net separate from the company operating capital. It had exactly $2 million in it. The court ordered that fund to be split evenly between Valerie and me." Oliver pointed to a digital signature at the bottom of the screen. "According to this addendum filed 3 days before your final divorce decree, you voluntarily waived your right to that fund. You signed over the entire $2 million entirely unconditionally." A cold, heavy weight dropped into my stomach. "I never signed that," I stated flatly. I read every single page of the final settlement. That addendum was not in the binder my lawyers gave me. They slipped it into the electronic filing, Oliver explained, pulling up another financial routing document. Valerie and Bradley used the forged corporate seal to validate the transfer to the banks. They bypassed the standard authentication checks because Valerie was still listed as the primary financial officer of the logistics company. "They stole your $2 million right under your nose. My own wife and my son-in-law had completely robbed me, but the realization that followed was even more sickening." I looked at the routing numbers on the screen. "Where did the money go?" I asked. "Valerie does not hide cash. She spends it on real estate and cars." Oliver tracked the wire transfer through a maze of holding companies. "The money did not go to Valerie," he revealed, tracing the final destination. "The entire $2 million was wired into a corporate account for Apex Solutions. That is Bradley's tech startup." The sheer audacity of the theft left me momentarily speechless. Bradley, the arrogant white man who looked at me with pure disdain, who mocked my clothes and called me a failure, had funded his entire elite lifestyle with my stolen retirement money. He paraded around Atlanta acting like a self-made Silicon Valley genius, while secretly surviving on the money a black engineer had painstakingly saved for 3 decades. "He stole my money to save his failing company," I said, my voice turning to ice. Oliver nodded, pulling up Bradley's public corporate filings. Apex Solutions was bleeding capital. Bradley burned through his initial investor funding in less than a year. He needed a massive cash injection to keep the lights on and secure his Series A funding round. "You were his bailout, Mr. Hayes." "How did you not notice this transfer?" Oliver asked, looking at me with genuine confusion. "How does a man who built a multi-million-dollar logistics empire miss a $2 million theft?" I leaned back in the uncomfortable plastic chair. "Because I never cared about the paper pushing," I explained. "Valerie handled the accountants, the lawyers, and the public relations. I built the actual engine. I am a systems architect. The proprietary routing algorithm that allows our trucks to beat the competition by delivering goods 20% faster was coded entirely by me. Valerie knows how to spend the profits, but she has absolutely no idea how the software functions. Bradley thinks he is a tech visionary, but he just stole capital from the man who actually built working technology. They thought because I wore work boots and grease-stained shirts I was stupid." Oliver smiled a sharp, dangerous smile. "Well, they just committed federal wire fraud and identity theft. We can take this directly to the FBI right now. Bradley will be in handcuffs by tomorrow morning." I raised my hand, stopping him. "No," I said firmly. Oliver looked confused. "What do you mean, no? We have the forged seal and the illegal wire transfer. We have them dead to rights. If we go to the FBI today, Bradley will hire the best defense attorneys in the state," I explained. "They will stall the investigation. Bradley will claim it was an administrative error, or he will blame an assistant for the forged signature. Meanwhile, he will quietly move that $2 million into offshore accounts where we can never reach it. If I want my money back, and if I want to see him rot in a federal penitentiary, I need the irrefutable digital paper trail from his own personal servers." "How are you going to get that?" Oliver asked. "You do not have access to his network." "Not yet," I replied. "But Bradley just invited me to play a game. He told me I was a pathetic, broken old man. He threatened to take my grandson away if I did not submit to his demands." People like Bradley suffer from a fatal flaw. Their arrogance makes them blind to the threat standing right in front of them. I stood up from the chair, my shoulder aching from where Bradley had shoved me the night before. "I am going to give them exactly what they want," I said. I am going to play the role of the desperate senile old fool begging for scraps at their table. I am going to walk right through their front door, and while they are busy mocking me, I am going to plant a digital Trojan horse directly into Bradley's network. Oliver leaned back, clearly impressed. You are going to hack your own son-in-law. I am going to completely dismantle him, I corrected. Prepare the legal filings, Oliver. Keep them quiet and ready to fire. When I get the server logs proving he orchestrated the wire fraud, we are going to drop a nuclear bomb on his entire life. I walked out of the legal clinic and stepped back into the Georgia heat. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets steaming and thick with humidity. I got into my rusted truck and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Kendra had told me nobody would ever want me again. Bradley had treated me like a stray dog. They wanted a weak old man. Tomorrow I was going to go to their multi-million-dollar mansion and put on the performance of a lifetime. The silent mechanic was about to tear their engine apart. The heavy iron gates of the Oak Ridge estate swung open slowly, revealing a neighborhood dripping with the kind of wealth that insulated people from the real world. My rusted pickup truck coughed and rattled as I drove up the manicured avenue lined with towering oak trees and pristine lawns. I pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of the sprawling mansion I had paid for. The contrast between my decaying vehicle and the sleek imported sports cars parked near the multi-car garage was almost comical. But I was not here to admire the architecture. I was here to perform. Before I stepped out of the truck, I looked at my reflection in the cracked rearview mirror. I needed to look like a man who had completely given up. I wore an oversized, faded flannel shirt, a pair of scuffed work boots, and trousers that had seen better days. I practiced slumping my shoulders forward, letting the natural ache from where Bradley had shoved me 2 days ago dictate my posture. I let my hands adopt a slight deliberate tremor. I had spent 40 years building a logistical empire demanding respect in every boardroom I entered. Today I had to swallow every ounce of that pride and beg. I walked up the stone steps to the massive double doors and pressed the brass doorbell. The chime echoed deep inside the cavernous house. A minute passed before the door swung open. Bradley stood there wearing a crisp linen shirt unbuttoned at the collar, holding a crystal glass of amber liquid. His arrogant smile faded the second he saw me, replaced by a deep theatrical sigh of annoyance. "What the hell are you doing here, Norman?" he snapped, glancing nervously over his shoulder toward the interior of the house. "I told you I am not playing games with you anymore. If you came to argue about the corporate shares, you can talk to my lawyers." I let my voice crack intentionally, making it sound weak and raspy. "I am not here about the shares, Bradley," I mumbled, keeping my eyes focused on the toes of his expensive leather loafers. "I do not care about the company anymore. I just need a little help. The court froze my accounts and I cannot afford my blood pressure medication this month. It is $200. Please. Just $200 until I can figure something out." Kendra appeared in the hallway behind him, holding a glass of white wine. She wore a flowing silk lounge dress, looking entirely out of place next to the father who had worked himself to the bone to provide her with that exact lifestyle. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me standing on her porch like a vagrant. "Dad, what are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and embarrassed. "You cannot just show up here looking like that. We have neighbors." I looked up at my daughter, channeling every ounce of genuine betrayal I felt into my eyes. "Kendra, please," I whispered, letting my hands shake visibly. "I have not taken my pills in 3 days. My chest hurts. I just need a loan. I will pay you back." Kendra rolled her eyes and took a sip of her wine. "I do not have cash lying around for you to waste. You should have thought about your medications before you let Mom outsmart you in court. You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." Bradley chuckled, swirling the liquor in his glass. "You hear that, Norman? We are not running a charity for failed businessmen. You want a handout, go stand on a highway off-ramp." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay in character. "I know I messed up," I pleaded, my voice trembling perfectly. "But I am begging you. Just $200. I will do whatever you want. I will work for it." Bradley's eyes lit up with a malicious gleam. The idea of humiliating the man who used to intimidate him was simply too tempting to pass up. He looked past me toward the massive backyard. "You want to work for it?" he asked, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. "Fine. The pool boy called in sick today, and Kendra and I want to swim later. The pool is full of leaves from the storm. You clean the entire pool and skim every last leaf out of the water, and I will give you your $200. Kendra frowned, clearly uncomfortable with having me on the property, but unwilling to stop her husband's sadistic game. Bradley, do not encourage him, she muttered. Relax, Kendra, Bradley replied, waving a dismissive hand. It builds character. Plus, it is about time your father learned what honest manual labor feels like. He looked back at me. Well, old man, do you want your medicine or not? I nodded slowly, keeping my head bowed. Yes, I muttered. I will do it. Bradley pointed toward the side gate. The skimmer is in the shed. Do not drag dirt across the patio. I walked heavily around the side of the sprawling mansion, leaning into my fake limp. Once I was out of their line of sight, my posture instantly straightened. The tremor in my hands vanished. My mind was sharp-focused and running purely on adrenaline. I found the long aluminum pool skimmer in the utility shed and walked out to the massive infinity pool that overlooked a private wooded valley. The Georgia sun beat down relentlessly as I began dragging the net across the surface of the water. My shoulder throbbed with real pain, but I ignored it. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the living room, I could see Kendra and Bradley. They had moved out to the shaded patio, pouring more wine and laughing. They occasionally glanced in my direction, pointing and smiling as they watched the former CEO of a logistics empire fishing dead leaves out of their swimming pool. I kept my head down, playing the part, dragging the heavy net back and forth. I needed them distracted, and alcohol was the perfect accomplice. I waited patiently, tracking their movements. After 30 minutes, Bradley stood up and walked toward the edge of the patio, turning his back to the house to take a phone call. Kendra leaned back on her lounge chair, closing her eyes and turning her face up to soak in the sun. This was my window. I dropped the skimmer net quietly onto the grass. I wiped my wet hands on my flannel shirt and moved swiftly toward the sliding glass doors leading into Bradley's home office. I had paid for the construction of this house, so I knew the exact layout. The heavy glass door was unlocked. I slid it open just enough to slip my body inside and pulled it shut behind me without making a sound. The air conditioning hit me instantly. Bradley's office was a testament to his inflated ego. A massive glass desk dominated the room, covered in dual monitors and scattered financial reports. I moved directly to the sleek silver computer tower sitting beneath the desk. I am an engineer and a systems architect. I spent 20 years securing corporate networks against foreign hackers. Bypassing the security of a mediocre tech bro was like picking a lock with a sledgehammer. I reached into the front pocket of my trousers and pulled out a small black USB flash drive. It looked like an ordinary thumb drive, but it was a customized piece of hardware known as a rubber ducky. I had spent the last 2 nights coding a specific payload onto it. The moment it plugged into a port, the computer would register it as a keyboard rather than a storage device. It would automatically inject a sequence of keystrokes at superhuman speed, bypassing the lock screen, disabling the local firewall, and silently installing a hidden remote access Trojan deep into the operating system's registry. I slid the USB drive into the back port of the computer. A tiny green LED light on the drive began to flash rapidly. I counted the seconds in my head, staring at the dark monitors. 5, 10, 15. I needed exactly 20 seconds for the payload to execute and establish a backdoor connection to the encrypted server I had set up in my motel room. My heart hammered against my ribs. If Bradley walked in right now, the entire operation would be over. I would be arrested for trespassing and corporate espionage. The green light blinked furiously, uploading the scripts that would soon rip his entire stolen fortune wide open. 18, 19, 20. The LED light stopped flashing and turned a solid, steady green. The payload was delivered. Bradley's entire network, his emails, his financial routing numbers, his passwords, his encrypted communications with Valerie, everything was now completely accessible to me from anywhere in the world. I pulled the USB drive out and slipped it back into my pocket. I moved silently back to the glass doors, checking the patio. Kendra was still sunbathing with her eyes closed. Bradley was pacing near the far edge of the lawn, yelling into his cell phone. I slid the door open, stepped back out into the sweltering heat, and picked up the pool skimmer just as Bradley ended his call and turned around. I spent another 20 minutes finishing the pool, letting the sweat soak through my flannel shirt to complete the illusion. When the water was perfectly clear, I walked over to the edge of the patio, leaning heavily on the aluminum pole. I am finished, Bradley. I rasped, wiping my forehead with a trembling hand. Bradley walked over, a look of supreme satisfaction on his face. He reached into his designer trousers, pulled out a sleek leather wallet, and extracted 2 crisp $100 bills. He did not hand them to me. He looked me in the eye, smiled, and intentionally dropped the bills onto the wet concrete decking right next to my muddy work boots. "Go buy your pills, Norman," he sneered, "and do not ever come back here asking for handouts again. If I see your garbage truck in my driveway one more time, I am calling the police." I looked down at the money soaking up the pool water on the concrete. I slowly bent my aching knees, bowing before the man who had stolen millions from me and picked up the wet bills. I kept my head down, perfectly playing the broken, defeated beggar. "Thank you," I mumbled, my voice weak. "Thank you, Bradley." I turned around and walked slowly back to my truck, my shoulders slumped in mock defeat. I climbed into the suffocating heat of the cab, started the rattling engine, and drove back down the pristine avenue, leaving the heavy iron gates behind me. As soon as I was a mile down the road, I pulled over onto a quiet side street. I threw the wet bills onto the passenger seat and reached into the back, taking out my battered laptop. I booted it up and connected to my mobile hotspot. I opened a secure command terminal and typed in a sequence of code. A black screen popped up, lines of green text scrolling rapidly down the monitor. Connection established, target acquired. I was inside Bradley's network. I now had a front row seat to every single lie, every stolen dollar, and every illegal conversation taking place inside that mansion. I looked at the flashing green cursor on my screen and smiled a cold, ruthless smile. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had forced me to beg. But all they had really done was hand the keys to their destruction directly to the architect. The game of defense was over. It was time to start breaking things. After my divorce, I lost everything, my home, my savings, and my dignity. But it was my daughter's words that broke me completely. She looked me in the eye and said, "Nobody will ever want you again." Those words shattered me, but they also ignited something deep inside. You will regret saying that I promised myself, determined to prove her wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The digital backdoor I installed on Bradley's computer was a masterpiece of silent engineering. For 48 hours, I sat in my damp studio apartment, surviving on instant coffee and stale bread, staring at the glowing screen of my old laptop. Through the remote access Trojan, I had complete unrestricted entry into the digital life of the man who had stolen my retirement fund. I could see every keystroke he made, every email he sent, and every encrypted financial file he thought was safely hidden behind his expensive corporate firewalls. It was a Tuesday evening, and the rain was hammering against the single cracked window of my apartment. I navigated through Bradley's hard drive, bypassing folders filled with useless startup pitch decks and massive credit card bills. Bradley was drowning in debt. His tech company, Apex Solutions, was nothing but a hollow shell, burning through the $2 million he had stolen from me at an alarming rate. He was paying for luxury leased vehicles, exotic corporate retreats, and inflated salaries for his frat boyfriends who called themselves executives. But it was not his failing startup that caught my attention. It was a calendar notification that popped up on his desktop screen. A high-priority video conference scheduled for 8 o'clock that night. The attendees were listed as Bradley, Kendra, and Valerie. The subject line simply read, "Liquidation Strategy." I leaned forward on my creaky folding chair, my heart beating with a slow, rhythmic intensity. I ran a quick script through my command terminal, silently activating the built-in microphone and webcam on Bradley's computer. I did not need to be in the room to hear them. I was already inside the walls. At exactly 8 o'clock, the video conferencing software opened on Bradley's screen. The webcam feed showed Bradley sitting in his lavish home office, swirling a glass of scotch. Kendra walked into the frame wearing a silk robe and sat on the edge of his glass desk holding her phone. A second later, a new window popped up on the grid. Valerie appeared on the screen, sitting in the penthouse condo she had bought immediately after kicking me out of our home. She looked perfectly manicured, wearing a heavy gold necklace and holding a glass of expensive red wine. "Let's get straight to the point," Valerie demanded, her voice echoing through the small speakers of my laptop. "The logistics company is hemorrhaging cash, Bradley. The regional managers are threatening to walk out, and the routing software has been crashing all week. Half our fleet was delayed in Texas yesterday because the system could not calculate the weather detours. Profits are down 40% this month alone." I smiled a thin, cold smile in the darkness of my apartment. The software was not crashing. It simply required a master engineer to update the regional data parameters. A master engineer they had just thrown out onto the street. Valerie had fought tooth and nail in court to steal a machine she had absolutely no idea how to operate. "I know the numbers are bad," Valerie Bradley replied, leaning back in his leather chair. "Without Norman maintaining the back end, the logistics network is practically useless to us. But we do not need the trucks to make our money. We just need the ground they are parked on." Valerie frowned, taking a slow sip of her wine. "What are you talking about?" Bradley clicked his mouse and opened a digital presentation, sharing his screen with the group. I intercepted the data stream, watching the same slides appear on my laptop. It was a highly detailed real estate portfolio focusing entirely on the massive commercial lot that housed the logistics headquarters in downtown Atlanta. It was a prime piece of real estate covering 4 acres of highly coveted urban property. "I have been in secret talks with Horizon Development Group," Bradley explained, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "They are buying up commercial blocks downtown to build a massive luxury shopping and residential complex. They desperately need our logistics lot to complete their blueprint. They have been trying to acquire that land for 3 years, but Norman always refused to sell because he actually cared about the warehouse workers." Kendra rolled her eyes, brushing a piece of lint off her robe. "Dad was always so painfully sentimental. He cared more about paying his forklift drivers than upgrading his own lifestyle. It was embarrassing." "Well, Norman is not here anymore," Bradley chuckled. "I had dinner with the Horizon executives yesterday. They are willing to offer a cash buyout for the entire commercial lot, $15 million. The number hung in the air, heavy with the weight of pure, absolute greed. Valerie nearly dropped her wine glass. Her eyes widened with a predatory hunger that I recognized all too well. $15 million, she breathed out slowly. "In cash." "Cash," Bradley confirmed. "We liquidate the company assets. We sell the trucks for scrap, we fire the warehouse staff, and we hand the empty lot over to Horizon Development. The corporate divorce decree gave you full ownership of the logistics company, Valerie. That means you have the legal authority to liquidate its assets. We split the $15 million. You take $5 million to retire in luxury, and Kendra and I take $10 million to properly fund Apex Solutions and buy that villa in Tuscany we have been looking at." It was the ultimate betrayal. They were not just destroying my legacy. They were preparing to throw hundreds of hardworking men and women out onto the street just to line their own pockets and flee the country. They were going to sell the heart of my empire to a group of corporate developers and walk away as multimillionaires. "When do we close the deal?" Valerie asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "This Friday night," Bradley answered. "We are hosting a private signing dinner with the Horizon Development Board of Directors at Le Petit Chateau. We sign the memorandum of understanding, they wire the preliminary escrow funds on Monday, and we are officially rich." They raised their glasses to the webcam, clinking their crystal against the screens in a digital toast to their own perceived brilliance. I sat in my damp, leaky apartment watching my family celebrate the total annihilation of my life's work. I did not scream. I did not throw my computer across the room. Instead, I began to laugh. It started as a low rumble in my chest and grew into a loud, cold, echoing laugh that filled the empty, decaying room. It was a laugh of pure, genuine amusement. Bradley was a thief, Valerie was a shark, and Kendra was a parasite. But for all their arrogance, all their expensive lawyers, and all their ruthless scheming, they were fundamentally stupid. They assumed that because Valerie won the logistics company in the divorce, she owned everything associated with it. They assumed that the sprawling 4-acre lot in downtown Atlanta was a corporate asset belonging to the logistics firm. It was a logical assumption to make. The company headquarters had sat on that land for 2 decades. But 20 years ago, when the business was just starting to boom, I had read a book on corporate liability. I knew the logistics industry was dangerous. A massive lawsuit from a highway accident could wipe out a company overnight. So to protect the physical ground we stood on, I made a very quiet, very deliberate legal maneuver. I did not buy the downtown lot under the name of the logistics company. I purchased the land using a completely separate, anonymous private trust called Ironwood Holdings. I was the sole creator, sole beneficiary, and sole executor of the Ironwood Trust. For 20 years, the logistics company did not own its headquarters. It merely paid a monthly lease to Ironwood Holdings. During the brutal divorce proceedings, Valerie's aggressive lawyers subpoenaed every document related to the logistics company. They successfully seized the brand, the trucks, the bank accounts, and the client lists. But they never once looked at the property deeds because the land was not legally tied to the divorce discovery. The Ironwood Trust paid its own property taxes through a blind account. The divorce decree gave Valerie the logistics business, but she was essentially taking ownership of a company that was nothing more than a tenant renting space on my land. They were planning a $15 million sale for a piece of real estate they did not even own. I reached into the battered duffel bag under my folding table and pulled out a heavy, fireproof lockbox. I spun the combination dial and opened the heavy lid. Inside, resting beneath my birth certificate and my old engineering degrees, was the original yellowed property deed for the downtown commercial lot, stamped firmly with the seal of Ironwood Holdings and signed exclusively by Norman Hayes. I closed the video feed on my laptop, leaving Valerie and Bradley to their drunken, greedy fantasies. I pulled out my cheap prepaid cell phone and dialed a number I had memorized. Oliver Reyes picked up on the second ring. The background noise of the busy legal clinic echoed through the receiver. "Mr. Hayes," Oliver said, sounding exhausted. "Tell me you have something good." "I have something spectacular," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "Bradley and Valerie are sitting down with Horizon Development this Friday night at Le Petit Chateau. They are planning to sign a $15 million land sale for the company headquarters." Oliver sighed heavily. "Norman, if Valerie was awarded the company in the divorce, she has the right to liquidate the assets. We cannot stop a legal corporate sale. She can sell the trucks, Oliver," I said, staring down at the property deed in my hands. "But she cannot sell the ground they are parked on. The land belongs to a private trust. I own the trust. They are trying to sell $15 million of stolen real estate to a major corporate developer across state lines." The line went completely dead silent for 5 long seconds. When Oliver finally spoke, his voice was wide awake and vibrating with intense predatory energy. "Norman, did you just tell me your ex-wife and your son-in-law are attempting to commit $15 million of interstate real estate fraud with a major corporate buyer?" "That is exactly what I am telling you," I said. Norman Oliver laughed a sharp, dangerous sound. "If you walk into that restaurant and prove they do not own the land they are trying to sell, you will not just ruin the deal. Horizon Development will report them to the federal authorities for attempted corporate fraud. The SEC will absolutely annihilate them." "Draft up the cease and desist orders," Oliver Wise commanded, standing up from my chair and sliding the property deed into a protective leather folder. "Get the injunctions ready. Friday night I am going to crash a $15 million dinner party, and I am going to take everything they have left. After my divorce, I lost everything: my home, my savings, and my dignity. But it was my daughter's words that broke me completely. She looked me in the eye and said, 'Nobody will ever want you again.' Those words shattered me, but they also ignited something deep inside. You will regret saying that I promised myself, determined to prove her wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Friday evening arrived with a suffocating humidity that clung to the Atlanta streets. I stood in front of the cracked mirror in my damp studio apartment, buttoning a faded gray suit jacket. It was the same suit I wore to my grandson's school play, where Kendra had me thrown out like a diseased animal. I did not wear it because I lacked other clothes. I wore it because I wanted them to see the exact man they had humiliated right before I destroyed their entire world. In my hands, I held a thick brown leather folder. Inside were the original property deeds for the 4-acre commercial lot, stamped with the seal of Ironwood Holdings, and a stack of cease and desist orders drafted by Oliver Reyes. I walked down the dark staircase of my building and climbed into my rusted pickup truck. The engine sputtered and roared to life. I drove toward the wealthy financial district where the skyscrapers glowed against the night sky. Le Petit Chateau was an exclusive French restaurant favored by the city's elite. It was the kind of place that did not list prices on the menu and required reservations 6 months in advance. I pulled my battered truck right up to the valet stand. The young valet in a crisp uniform stared at my vehicle in absolute shock. I handed him a $20 bill and tossed him the keys, telling him to park it up front. He was too stunned to argue. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant. The interior was a display of quiet, immense wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over tables covered in white linen. Soft classical music played in the background. The maitre d', a tall man with a severe expression, stepped directly into my path. He looked at my worn suit and my scuffed boots. He opened his mouth to tell me I was in the wrong place. I did not stop walking. I stared right through him and said, "I am expected in the private dining room." My sheer confidence caught him off guard, and I pushed past him before he could call security. The private dining room was located at the back of the restaurant behind frosted glass doors. I stood outside for a moment listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped into the room. The scene before me was a masterpiece of corporate greed. Bradley sat at the head of a long, polished mahogany table wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo. Valerie sat to his right, draped in expensive jewelry and sipping champagne. Kendra was seated next to her husband, looking like a wealthy socialite without a care in the world. Opposite them sat three older white men in sharp business suits. These were the executives from Horizon Development Group, the men ready to hand over $15 million for a piece of land my family did not own. On the center of the table, resting next to a silver ice bucket, was a thick stack of legal papers, the Memorandum of Understanding. Bradley was holding a heavy gold fountain pen, preparing to sign his name and secure his stolen fortune. The heavy glass doors clicked shut behind me. The sound was soft, but it was enough to draw the attention of the room. Valerie looked up first. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She lowered her champagne flute, her hand shaking so violently the liquid spilled over the rim. Kendra gasped out loud, covering her mouth with her hand as if she had just seen a ghost. Bradley froze the gold pen, hovering just inches above the signature line. His arrogant smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He stood up abruptly, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward. "What the hell are you doing here?" Norman Bradley shouted, his voice echoing off the acoustic panels of the private room. He turned to the confused Horizon executives, trying to salvage his professional facade. "I am so sorry, gentlemen. This is my father-in-law. He suffers from severe dementia, and he is currently unhoused. He must have wandered in here by mistake. I will have security remove him immediately." Kendra stood up, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Dad, you are ruining a very important business dinner," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Leave right now before we have you arrested for trespassing." Valerie remained frozen in her seat, staring at the leather folder in my hands with a growing sense of absolute dread. I did not look at Kendra. I did not look at Valerie. I walked slowly and deliberately past Bradley, completely ignoring his desperate attempts to intimidate me. I stopped directly in front of the lead executive from Horizon Development. He was a silver-haired man with sharp, calculating eyes. He looked at my faded suit and then looked up into my face. "You are about to make a $15 million mistake," I said, my voice low, calm, and carrying the weight of absolute authority. Bradley lunged forward, trying to grab my shoulder. "Do not listen to him. He is having a psychotic episode," Bradley yelled, sweating profusely. "Security! Somebody get security in here right now." I effortlessly brushed Bradley's hand away. I opened the brown leather folder and pulled out the thick stack of documents. I placed them flat on top of the Memorandum of Understanding, covering Bradley's signature line entirely. "My name is Norman Hayes," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the lead developer. "I am the sole owner and executor of Ironwood Holdings. The logistics company sitting on that downtown lot is merely a tenant. They do not own the ground they operate on. I own the ground. You are currently negotiating the purchase of stolen real estate." The room went completely silent. The classical music playing through the restaurant speakers suddenly sounded incredibly loud. The lead executive frowned, looking down at the documents I had just placed on the table. He picked up the original yellowed property deed, checking the state seals and my signature. Then he picked up the legal injunctions drafted by Oliver Reyes. The developer turned his sharp gaze toward Valerie. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his tone turning dangerously cold. "According to your divorce disclosures, you claimed full ownership of all assets associated with the logistics firm. Does your logistics company own Ironwood Holdings?" Valerie opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked at Bradley, who was hyperventilating, his face slick with panic sweat. "We can explain," Bradley stammered, taking a step toward the table. "It is a minor administrative oversight. We will clear the title before the final escrow transfer. The company is ours. We have the court orders. You have a court order for trucks and software you do not know how to use," I corrected him, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "You do not have a court order for the 4 acres of commercial real estate. If you sign that memorandum today, gentlemen, you will be actively participating in a $15 million interstate wire fraud. My lawyers have already notified the Securities and Exchange Commission." The lead executive dropped the documents back onto the table as if they were covered in poison. He looked at Bradley with a mixture of absolute disgust and fury. Horizon Development does not do business with frauds, he said, his voice hard and uncompromising. You deliberately attempted to sell us a property you do not have the legal title for. You lied on your corporate disclosures. Please wait, Bradley pleaded, holding up his hands. The land is practically ours. We will sue him. We will have him declared incompetent. The land will default to Kendra. Give us 1 month to force him into a care facility. The sheer depravity of Bradley's words hung in the air. He had just admitted to a room full of corporate executives that he planned to falsely imprison his father-in-law to steal a piece of real estate. The Horizon executives looked thoroughly repulsed. We are terminating all negotiations immediately, the lead developer announced, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. Do not ever contact our firm again. If our legal department finds out you used our name in any of your fraudulent filings, we will bury your tech startup in lawsuits. The 3 white executives gathered their briefcases and walked briskly out of the private dining room, refusing to look at Bradley or Valerie as they left. The heavy glass doors swung shut, leaving the 4 of us alone in the tense, suffocating silence. The $15 million deal was dead. Bradley's grand plan to save his failing startup and flee to Europe was completely incinerated. Valerie had lost her golden ticket. Kendra realized she was married to a man who had just blown their entire future on a reckless, illegal gamble. Bradley stared at the empty chairs where the developers had just been sitting. His chest heaved as he struggled to process the total annihilation of his life. He slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide, wild, and completely devoid of sanity. The arrogant tech bro facade melted away entirely, leaving behind nothing but a cornered, desperate animal. You ruined everything, Bradley screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unhinged rage. You old useless piece of garbage. You took my $15 million. Bradley grabbed the heavy silver ice bucket from the center of the table. Champagne bottles and ice crashed to the polished wood as he hurled it out of the way. He lunged across the mahogany table, completely ignoring the expensive crystal glasses that shattered under his knees. Kendra shrieked, backing away against the wall. Valerie sat frozen in her chair, too stunned by the loss of the money to even register the violence erupting inches away from her. I did not flinch. I stood perfectly still, watching him come at me. Bradley scrambled off the table and grabbed me by the lapels of my faded gray suit jacket. He slammed me backward against the frosted glass doors. The impact sent a sharp jolt of pain up my spine, but I kept my eyes locked onto his terrified, wild gaze. I am going to kill you, he roared, spittle flying from his mouth. I am going to end you, Norman. Before he could draw his fist back, the heavy glass doors flew open behind me. The commotion had drawn the attention of the entire restaurant. 3 large men in dark suits, the restaurant security team, poured into the private room. They grabbed Bradley from behind, dragging him off me. Bradley fought like a madman, kicking and screaming curses that echoed into the main dining room, horrifying the wealthy patrons eating their dinners. Let me go, he thrashed, fighting the guards as they wrestled him down onto the expensive carpet. He ruined my life. He stole my money. I straightened my suit jacket and brushed a piece of broken glass off my sleeve. I looked down at the man who had shoved me to the floor of my squalid apartment just a few days ago. He was now pinned to the ground by 3 security guards, sobbing hysterically as his fantasy empire collapsed around him. I looked over at Kendra. She was pressing her back against the expensive wallpaper, looking at her husband with absolute horror. Then she looked at me. There was no superiority left in her eyes. There was only fear. I told you nobody would ever want you again, Kendra, I said, my voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the room. Look at your husband. Look at your mother. You bet your entire life on thieves, and now you have absolutely nothing left to steal. I turned my back on the wreckage of my former family and walked calmly out of the private dining room. I strolled through the main restaurant, ignoring the shocked whispers of the wealthy patrons, and stepped back out into the humid Atlanta night. The valet brought my rusted pickup truck around. I climbed into the cab, started the engine, and drove away, leaving them to deal with the police, the shattered glass, and the ashes of their stolen empire. After my divorce, I lost everything: my home, my savings, and my dignity. But it was my daughter's words that broke me completely. She looked me in the eye and said, "Nobody will ever want you again." Those words shattered me, but they also ignited something deep inside. You will regret saying that I promised myself, determined to prove her wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The rain started again as I drove away from the French restaurant. The streetlights flickered against the wet windshield of my rusted truck. I thought about the look of absolute shock on Valerie's face. The $15 million deal was completely dead. But I knew Bradley would not just accept defeat. Men like Bradley do not lose gracefully. They throw tantrums. They resort to physical violence when their fake intelligence fails them. I parked my truck and walked up the dark stairwell of my decaying apartment building. I unlocked my thin wooden door and stepped inside. The apartment was cold and damp. The bucket in the corner was full of rainwater. I emptied it into the rusted sink. I sat on my lumpy mattress and opened my battered duffel bag. I pulled out a small black digital alarm clock. It looked like a cheap piece of junk from a local thrift store. But it was not. I had modified it carefully last week. Inside the plastic casing was a high-definition wide-angle camera with a motion sensor and a cellular uplink. It recorded audio perfectly. I plugged it into the wall outlet facing the center of the room. I adjusted the angle, making sure it captured the front door and the small folding table. I sat in the dark and waited. I knew he was coming. I thought about Bradley's massive arrogance. He grew up with a silver spoon and never had to work for anything. When he failed, his parents bailed him out. When he bankrupted his first company, he just started another one. He married Kendra because he saw a vulnerability he could exploit. He saw a wealthy black family and assumed he was naturally superior. He assumed my silence was submission and my patience was stupidity. He thought he could just step on my neck and take my empire. He thought I would roll over and die. But men like me are built differently. We do not break when the world pushes down on us. We harden and become steel. I spent 40 years fighting in boardrooms full of men exactly like Bradley. Men who smiled to my face and tried to stab me in the back. I survived them all. I was not going to be defeated by a spoiled child in a tailored suit. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. The rain outside turned into a heavy downpour, and the wind rattled the loose window panes. I drank a glass of tap water in the dark. The darkness was my friend because it hid my intentions and cloaked my preparations. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash downstairs. It sounded like the heavy metal security door being kicked open. My heart rate stayed perfectly steady. I set my glass down on the counter. Heavy, sloppy footsteps echoed up the narrow wooden staircase. The intruder was not trying to be quiet. He was stumbling and dragging his feet while muttering loudly. He reached the second floor and walked down the narrow hallway. He stopped right outside my door. I stood in the center of the room, directly in the frame of the hidden camera. I waited. The thin wooden door exploded inward. The cheap metal deadbolt tore through the door frame, sending wood splinters flying across the linoleum floor. Bradley stood in the doorway looking completely unhinged. His expensive tuxedo jacket was ripped at the shoulder, and his silk tie was hanging loosely around his neck. His shirt was soaked with rain and sweat. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. He smelled heavily of cheap liquor and expensive cologne. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving with uncontrolled rage. He looked like a cornered animal completely stripped of his fake corporate armor. He stepped into my apartment, bringing the smell of alcohol and violence with him. "You think you are so smart?" He slurred, his voice thick and aggressive. "You think you can just walk into my dinner and ruin my life? You are nothing, Norman. You are a washed-up old fool who got lucky." I did not move, and I did not raise my hands to defend myself. I needed him to escalate the situation. I needed the camera to capture every single second of his unprovoked assault. "Bradley," I said, my voice calm and low, "you are trespassing. You need to leave before I call the police." My calmness infuriated him even more. He kicked the small folding table, overturning it completely. The metal legs scraped loudly against the floor. He grabbed the plastic chair and hurled it against the far wall, where it shattered into 3 pieces. "You are not calling anyone," he screamed, spitting as he spoke. "You took $15 million from me. That was my money. That was my way out. You ruined my company and you ruined my life." He lunged forward with surprising speed for a drunk man. He grabbed me by the collar of my faded shirt and slammed me backward against the drywall. The impact knocked the breath out of my lungs, and my bad shoulder flared with blinding pain. I let my knees buckle slightly, playing the role of the helpless elderly victim. I did not fight back, and I let my arms hang loose at my sides. I made sure my face and his face were perfectly illuminated by the dim streetlight filtering through the window right in the line of sight of the hidden alarm clock camera. Bradley pressed his forearm against my throat, pinning me to the wall. He leaned his face inches from mine, and his breath smelled like sour whiskey. "You listen to me, you pathetic old man," he hissed, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You are going to sign that land over to me tomorrow. You are going to call Horizon Development and tell them you made a mistake." If you do not, I'm going to end you. I'm going to make sure you die in this miserable gutter. You think you are a big-shot businessman. You are just an arrogant black man who forgot his place, and you should have stayed out of my way." I stared directly into his bloodshot eyes. The racist insult did not shock me. It merely confirmed exactly who he was beneath the polished progressive tech founder facade. I struggled to breathe under the weight of his forearm, but I managed to speak. "You are a failure, Bradley." I choked out, staring right through him. "You are a fraud, and now everyone knows it." The words pushed him completely over the edge. He tightened his grip on my throat, cutting off my air supply. Dark spots began to dance at the edges of my vision. I forced myself to stay conscious because I needed him to keep talking. He was losing control of his mouth. "You think I care about this family?" he screamed, his face contorted with ugly rage. "You think I care about your pathetic daughter? Kendra is a clueless idiot who spends money like a child and complains about everything. I cannot stand her, and I have not been able to stand her for years. I only stayed with her because I needed your money to fund my company. You think I was going to take her to Tuscany? You are dumber than she is." He laughed, a maniacal, unhinged sound that echoed in the small room. "I was going to take the 15 million and leave her with absolutely nothing. I already have tickets booked to Paris with my girlfriend. We have been planning this for 6 months. I was going to dump Kendra and let her figure out her own miserable life. I was going to be free of this entire pathetic family, but you ruined my escape." He pulled his arm back and drove his fist into my stomach. I doubled over, gasping for air, and fell to the hard linoleum floor. I curled into a ball, clutching my ribs. The pain was sharp and suffocating, but my mind was singing with absolute victory. He had just confessed to everything. He had admitted to the financial extortion and the elder abuse. He had admitted to the racial hostility. He had just confessed to a long-standing affair and a premeditated plan to abandon his wife and steal the family fortune. The hidden camera had captured every single crystal-clear syllable. Bradley stood over me, breathing heavily. He kicked me in the side with the toe of his expensive leather shoe. "You have 24 hours to fix this, Norman," he threatened, kicking me again. 24 hours or I will come back here and finish the job. I will kill you, and I will tell the police you had a heart attack because nobody cares about an old homeless man anyway." He turned around and stumbled out of the apartment, leaving the shattered wooden door hanging off its hinges. I listened to his heavy footsteps retreat down the stairs. I listened to the front door of the building slam shut. I listened to the sound of his sports car engine revving loudly in the street before tires squealed on the wet asphalt and he sped away into the night. I lay on the cold floor for 5 full minutes, focusing on my breathing. I inhaled slowly through my nose and exhaled through my mouth, managing the sharp pain in my ribs and my shoulder. I tasted blood on my lip where I had bitten it during the struggle. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I slowly pushed myself up onto my hands and knees and eventually maneuvered myself into a sitting position against the wall. I looked across the room at the digital alarm clock sitting on the kitchen counter. The tiny red recording light was completely invisible to the naked eye, but I knew it was there. I pulled my cheap prepaid cell phone from my pocket and opened the secure application to access the remote server. The video file was there, perfectly encoded and safely uploaded to the cloud. I pressed play on my phone screen. The high-definition video played flawlessly, and the audio was crisp and clear. I watched Bradley kick down my door and destroy my furniture. I watched him grab me by the throat and hurl his racist insults. I listened to him proudly confess his long-standing affair and his elaborate plan to abandon Kendra and steal the $15 million. I paused the video and let out a low, steady breath. My body ached with bruises that would take weeks to heal, but I had never felt more powerful in my entire life. Bradley thought he had just delivered a brutal warning and established dominance through physical violence. He did not realize he had just handed me the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. Valerie and Kendra thought they could discard me because I was no longer useful to them. Bradley thought he could beat me into submission because I was old and living in poverty. They all operated on the assumption that might makes right and that money equals power. I operated on a completely different set of rules based on patient strategy and the absolute certainty that pride always precedes a spectacular fall. I touched my bruised neck and smiled in the dark, empty room. Bradley had just given me the exact tool I needed to execute the next phase of my plan. It was time to divide and conquer. It was time to let Kendra hear exactly what her beloved, successful husband truly thought of her. The foundation of their stolen empire was about to crumble entirely from the inside out. After my divorce, I lost everything: my home, my savings, and my dignity. But it was my daughter's words that broke me completely. She looked me in the eye and said, "Nobody will ever want you again." Those words shattered me, but they also ignited something deep inside. You will regret saying that I promised myself, determined to prove her wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I woke up the next morning with a stiff neck and a throbbing pain in my ribs where Bradley had kicked me. The harsh morning light filtered through the cracked window of my damp apartment, illuminating the shattered pieces of my wooden door hanging loosely off its hinges. A normal man would have called the police right then and there. A normal man would have filed assault charges and let the legal system handle a violent intruder. But I was not a normal man, and I did not want Bradley to sit in a jail cell while his stolen money remained safely hidden in offshore accounts. I wanted him to lose absolutely everything before the police ever touched him. I sat at my small folding table and opened my battered laptop. I accessed the secure cloud server and downloaded the high-definition video from the hidden alarm clock camera. I watched the footage again, making sure the audio was perfectly clear. Bradley's arrogant voice echoed in the quiet room as he bragged about his secret girlfriend and his plan to steal the $15 million and abandon Kendra. I extracted just the audio file, isolating the exact 2 minutes where he insulted his wife and confessed his entire elaborate exit strategy. I opened a secure encrypted web browser and created an anonymous email address. I attached the audio file and typed a very simple subject line: "Listen to what your husband truly thinks of you." I entered Kendra's personal email address and her private phone number. I clicked send and leaned back in my creaky chair. The digital grenade was officially launched. I did not have to wait long to see the explosion. I quickly opened the command terminal on my laptop and activated the remote access Trojan I had planted on Bradley's office computer. I triggered the webcam and the microphone, giving me a perfect live feed of his sprawling home office. Bradley was sitting at his massive glass desk, rubbing his temples and staring at a spreadsheet. He looked hungover and miserable. His designer shirt was wrinkled and his hair was a mess. 10 minutes passed in absolute silence. Then the heavy oak doors of Bradley's office flew open with such force they slammed against the drywall. Kendra marched into the room, holding her smartphone in her trembling hand. She was wearing her expensive silk robe, but her face was pale and contorted with an ugly mixture of shock and sheer rage. She did not say a single word. She simply walked up to the glass desk, slammed her phone down onto the surface, and pressed play. Bradley's own voice filled the home office, crystal clear and undeniably authentic. The audio played his vicious rant about how much he hated his wife. It played his confession about his girlfriend and the tickets to Paris. It played his detailed plan to take the $15 million from the land sale and leave Kendra with absolutely nothing. Bradley froze, completely paralyzed in his expensive leather chair. All the color drained from his face as he listened to his own arrogant voice destroy his fake marriage. He reached out to grab the phone, but Kendra snatched it away before he could touch it. "You pathetic, lying thief!" Kendra screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysterical fury. "You have been sleeping with another woman for 6 months. You were going to steal the money my mother fought for in court and leave me with nothing." Bradley stood up, raising his hands in a desperate attempt to calm her down. "Kendra, please listen to me," he stammered, taking a step toward her. "That audio is fake. It has to be fake. Your father is a tech guy, and he probably used artificial intelligence to generate my voice. He is trying to frame me because I yelled at him yesterday." Kendra let out a shrill, manic laugh that bordered on actual insanity. "Do you think I am stupid, Bradley?" she yelled, throwing her phone directly at his chest. "You talk in your sleep. You smell like cheap perfume half the time you come home late. I ignored it because I thought we were building an empire together. I defended you to my own father. I let you treat him like garbage because I thought you were a genius. You are not a genius. You are a disgusting parasite." Bradley realized his lies were not working. The panic in his eyes instantly hardened into a cold, vicious hostility. The fake corporate gentleman vanished entirely, leaving behind the cruel, manipulative fraud I always knew he was. "You want the truth," Kendra Bradley shouted, leaning over the glass desk. "Fine. Yes, I am leaving you. You are an insufferable, spoiled child who contributes absolutely nothing to this relationship. You spend my money on designer bags and complain about everything. I only married you because I needed access to your parents' corporate assets. You were nothing but a stepping stone to fund my tech company." Kendra shrieked in absolute blind rage. She grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from the desk and hurled it directly at his head. Bradley ducked just in time and the solid crystal smashed into the expensive flat-screen monitor behind him, shattering the display into a spiderweb of broken glass. "You are a dead man!" Kendra roared, grabbing handfuls of documents and throwing them into the air. "I am going to call my lawyers. I am going to call my mother. We are going to take every single penny you have. We are going to bury you in debt." Bradley laughed a harsh, mocking sound. "You cannot take anything from me, you stupid woman. Apex Solutions is bankrupt. The money your mother stole from your father is completely gone. I burned through all $2 million trying to keep my servers running. The $15 million land deal was my only way out, and your pathetic father ruined it last night. You have no money, Kendra. You are just as broke as he is." Kendra screamed again, a raw, guttural sound, and lunged across the desk, grabbing Bradley's shirt and clawing at his face. Bradley shoved her backward hard enough to send her crashing into a tall wooden bookshelf. Books and decorative vases rained down around her, shattering on the hardwood floor. The pristine, expensive office was transformed into an absolute war zone in a matter of seconds. I sat in my damp apartment watching the live feed with a cold, calculated satisfaction. My enemies were tearing each other apart exactly as I had planned. Bradley stormed out of the office, leaving Kendra sobbing on the floor among the broken glass and scattered papers. I heard the front door of the mansion slam shut, and seconds later the roar of his sports car speeding down the driveway. I watched Kendra slowly pull herself up from the floor, crying hysterically. I expected her to realize the magnitude of her mistakes. I expected her to understand that her father had been right all along and that she had traded genuine love for a manipulative thief. My cheap prepaid cell phone rang on the folding table. The caller ID showed Kendra's name. I picked it up and pressed the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. "This is all your fault," Kendra screamed into the receiver without waiting for me to speak. Her voice was shrill and dripping with venom. "You sent me that audio file, did you not? You just could not stand to see me happy. You lost your stupid company and you lost your house, so you decided to ruin my marriage out of pure jealousy. You are a jealous, bitter old man." I sat perfectly still, absorbing the sheer magnitude of her delusion. She had just heard her husband confess to stealing millions and planning to abandon her for another woman. She had just been physically shoved to the ground by the man she chose over her own family. Yet in her twisted, narcissistic mind, she still blamed me. She blamed the father who had worked 18-hour days to pay for her luxury life. She refused to take any accountability for her own greed. "You are truly blind, Kendra," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. "Bradley stole your future, and you are defending the thief. You chose a polished fraud over a father who built an empire for you. I did not ruin your marriage. Your marriage was a transaction, and your buyer just went bankrupt. I will never forgive you for this," she shrieked, crying wildly into the phone. "You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are dead." I hung up the phone and set it down on the table. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. The last lingering shred of fatherly affection I held for Kendra evaporated completely into the damp air of the apartment. She was no longer my daughter. She was simply another hostile variable in a complex equation, and it was time to isolate and eliminate all remaining variables. I picked up the phone again and dialed the number for the legal clinic. Oliver Reyes answered on the first ring. Norman Oliver said, his voice sharp and alert. "Tell me you are ready." "I am ready, Oliver," I replied, staring at the frozen video feed of Kendra's destroyed home office. "The internal alliance is completely broken. Bradley is running and Valerie is isolated. Prepare to press the launch button. File the commercial eviction notices immediately. I want the logistics company locked out of my property by Monday morning. The grace period is officially over." I hung up the phone with Oliver and placed it face down on the rickety folding table. The decision was made. The commercial eviction notices were officially in motion. My logistics company, the empire I had built with my bare hands and thousands of sleepless nights, was about to be locked out of its own headquarters. The silence in my cramped, damp apartment felt completely different now. It was no longer the silence of a defeated exile. It was the silence of a predator waiting for the trap to spring. I walked over to the small kitchenette and poured myself a glass of tap water. The digital clock on the counter read 2 in the afternoon. The brutal Georgia summer heat was already baking the peeling paint on the walls. I took a slow sip, letting the cool water soothe my dry throat. My ribs still ached from where Bradley had kicked me, but the pain was a welcome reminder of my intense focus. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed against the splintered wood of my front door. It was not the chaotic pounding of a drunken Bradley. It was a precise, demanding knock of someone who expected the world to immediately open up for them. I set my glass down. I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the damaged door open. Valerie stood in the dingy, poorly lit hallway of my apartment building. She wore a pristine, cream-colored trench coat tailored perfectly to her frame and a pair of dark designer sunglasses pushed up into her meticulously styled hair. She clutched a heavy leather handbag that cost more than the annual rent of every tenant on this floor combined. She looked entirely out of place, a wealthy queen forced to step into a muddy gutter. Her eyes scanned the broken doorframe where Bradley had forced his way in, then darted around my squalid living conditions with an expression of barely concealed disgust. "Norman," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "We need to talk." She did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me, stepping into the cramped room, carefully avoiding a damp spot on the linoleum floor. She stopped in the center of the apartment, turning around to face me. She took off her sunglasses and looked at me with a fake expression of deep maternal concern. It was the exact same look she used to manipulate board members and charm wealthy investors. I closed the door, leaning my injured shoulder against the frame. "What do you want, Valerie?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You have already taken the company. You took the house. I assume you are not here to check on my health." Valerie sighed, a theatrical display of exhaustion. She delicately placed her expensive handbag on my cheap folding table. "I am here because things have gotten completely out of hand, Norman. Bradley is out of his mind. He ruined the Horizon development deal with his arrogant stupidity. The investors pulled out entirely, and now the logistics company is facing a severe liquidity crisis. We are bleeding cash. The regional managers are threatening to strike, and the routing software is completely stalled." I crossed my arms over my chest. "I warned you years ago that Bradley was a parasite," I replied coldly. "You chose to ignore me because he took you to fancy galas and stroked your ego. You let him steal $2 million from my retirement fund to finance his fake tech company. You authorized that forged corporate seal, Valerie. Do not stand in my apartment and pretend you are a victim of his incompetence. You were fully complicit." Valerie stiffened, her fake concern slipping for a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place. "That was a misunderstanding," she lied smoothly. "Bradley handled the financial transfers. I merely signed the authorizations he put in front of me. But that does not matter right now, Norman. What matters is family. Kendra is devastated. Her marriage is falling apart. Bradley abandoned her, and she is sitting in that massive house completely alone." "Do not use my daughter to manipulate me," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "I spoke to Kendra this morning. She listened to her husband confess to stealing millions and planning to abandon her for another woman. She listened to him admit he only married her for our money. And do you know what she did, Valerie? She blamed me. She screamed at me and told me I was dead to her. You raised a woman who values polished lies over ugly truths. Kendra made her choice, and she chose the thief." Valerie stepped closer, her pristine coat brushing against the edge of the cheap table. "Norman, please. We built that logistics company together. We spent 40 years creating a legacy for our grandson. Think about Leo. Do you really want to see the family empire collapse into bankruptcy just to satisfy your pride? We can fix this. I can fire Bradley from the board of directors. I can reinstate your access to the back-end servers. We can run the company together again just like the old days. But I need you to sign over the title to Ironwood Holdings. We need to sell that downtown lot to keep the company afloat." I stared at the woman I had been married to for 4 decades. She was incredibly skilled at weaving lies with half-truths. She was trying to frame the sale of my land as a noble sacrifice to save the family business. She completely ignored the fact that she had just tried to sell that exact same land behind my back for $15 million to fund her own luxurious retirement. "You do not want to save the company, Valerie," I stated, staring directly into her calculating eyes. "You want to cash out. You realize the trucks and the warehouses are worthless without the land they sit on. You realized you cannot sell a company that does not even own its own headquarters. Horizon Development humiliated you in that private dining room, and now you are desperate." Valerie realized her charm offensive was failing entirely. Her posture rigidified and the fake warmth evaporated from her face. The corporate shark emerged, wiping away the concerned mother routine. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp rectangular piece of paper. She slapped it down onto the folding table right next to my old laptop. "I am not here to play games with you, Norman," she said, her voice turning sharp and venomous. "You are living in a filthy box. You are wearing rags. You have absolutely no money, no power, and no future. I am offering you a golden parachute." I looked down at the piece of paper. It was a certified cashier's check drawn from the logistics company main operating account. It was made out to Norman Hayes. The amount printed in bold black ink was $100,000. "Take the check," Norman Valerie commanded, crossing her arms over her tailored coat. "It is $100,000 in tax-free cash. It is more money than you could possibly earn in the next 10 years at your age. Take the money, go buy yourself a quiet little house in the suburbs and sign the Ironwood Holdings deed over to me today. It is a generous settlement. You walk away with cash, and I save the company. It is a win for everyone." I looked at the check, and then I looked back up at Valerie. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I reached out and picked up the crisp piece of paper, holding it between my thumb and index finger. "I spent 40 years breaking my back to build an empire," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "I sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my body. I bought that 4-acre commercial lot 20 years ago with my own sweat. It is worth $15 million on the open market. And you walk into my squalid apartment, the apartment you forced me into, and offer me $100,000. You offer me spare change from the very company you stole from me." I did not tear the check. I did not yell. I simply flicked my wrist, tossing the paper through the air. The $100,000 check fluttered down and landed directly in the puddle of dirty rainwater near the bucket in the corner. "You price me too cheaply, Valerie," I said, stepping forward and forcing her to take a step back. "You think because I am wearing old clothes I have forgotten my own worth. You think because you stripped my bank accounts, you stripped my intelligence. Keep your spare change. I do not want a settlement." Valerie's face contorted with absolute unhinged fury. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my chest, dropping every ounce of her polished demeanor. "You are a stubborn, arrogant old fool," she screamed, her voice echoing off the thin walls. "You think you can hold that land hostage? I have the best corporate lawyers in the entire state of Georgia. I will drag you through civil court for the next 10 years. I will bleed you dry with legal fees until you are begging me for $1,000. You do not have the resources to fight me, Norman. You are going to lose everything all over again." I looked at her, completely unfazed by her frantic threats. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cheap, prepaid cell phone. I checked the time on the digital display. "You should check your corporate email, Valerie," I advised, my tone conversational but laced with absolute lethal intent. "My attorney, Oliver Reyes, filed the paperwork an hour ago. You are officially in violation of your commercial lease agreement. The logistics company has failed to pay rent to Ironwood Holdings for the past 45 days since the divorce decree was finalized." Valerie's eyes darted wildly as confusion mixed with her rising panic. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about a commercial eviction notice, Valerie," I clarified, stepping toward the broken door. "I just authorized the legal mandate. You have exactly 30 days to remove every single truck, every piece of office furniture, and every employee from my 4-acre property. If you do not vacate the premises by the deadline, the sheriff's department will physically lock the gates and seize all remaining assets on the property to cover the unpaid rent." Valerie stood frozen in the center of the apartment, her mouth slightly open. The reality of the situation crashed down on her like a concrete block. Without the headquarters, the logistics company could not operate. Without the parking lot, the fleet of trucks had nowhere to go. I had just legally dismantled her entire stolen operation with a single piece of paper. "You cannot do this," she breathed out, her voice barely a whisper. "You will destroy the business. You destroyed the business when you forged my signature and stole my life." I corrected her, opening the broken door and gesturing toward the dark hallway. "Now get out of my apartment, Valerie. The real war has just begun and you have already lost." Valerie stared at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of hatred and absolute defeat. She snatched her designer bag off the table, completely ignoring the $100,000 check soaking in the dirty rainwater. She marched out of the apartment, her heels clicking furiously against the concrete floor of the hallway. I closed the broken door and leaned against it. The corporate eviction was in motion. The trap was set. Valerie and Bradley were completely backed into a corner, and I knew exactly what cornered animals did. They were going to try to fight dirty. They were going to come after my sanity, but I was already 10 steps ahead waiting for them to make their final, fatal mistake. Monday morning arrived with a thick, humid heat that clung to the Atlanta skyline. I stood on the sidewalk across from the massive iron gates of the logistics headquarters, the very empire I had built from the ground up over 40 years. The sprawling 4-acre complex was a hive of activity. Dozens of 18-wheelers rumbled loudly as they lined up at the loading docks, while hundreds of warehouse workers moved pallets of freight. To the untrained eye, it looked like a highly profitable, booming enterprise. To me, it looked like a stolen machine taking its final breaths before a complete shutdown. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb beside me. Oliver Reyes stepped out holding a thick leather briefcase. He adjusted his tie and looked at the massive facility with a sharp, appreciative nod. "The Fulton County Sheriff's Department is exactly 3 minutes away," Oliver said, checking his watch. The commercial judge reviewed the lease agreement and the payment history over the weekend. He granted the ex parte eviction order without hesitation. "The logistics company has been operating on your property illegally since the day the divorce was finalized." I zipped up my faded work jacket. I did not wear a suit today. I wore the dark blue canvas jacket embroidered with the original company logo, the same jacket I wore 20 years ago when I personally poured the concrete for the main administrative building. I wanted Valerie to look out her plush executive window and see the ghost of the man she thought she had buried. 3 marked patrol cars rounded the corner, their tires gripping the asphalt as they pulled directly up to the main entrance. 4 uniformed deputies stepped out carrying thick stacks of neon orange legal notices. The lead deputy, a tall, broad-shouldered man, approached us and confirmed Oliver's identity. We walked together through the pedestrian gates, bypassing the confused security guards who immediately scrambled for their radios. We marched straight across the bustling asphalt yard toward the glass-fronted executive building. The roar of the diesel engines was deafening, but the sheer presence of the armed deputies caused a sudden ripple of silence to spread across the loading docks. Forklifts halted in their tracks. Drivers stepped out of their cabs. The deputies pushed through the revolving glass doors and entered the pristine marble lobby. The receptionist, a young woman I had hired 5 years ago, gasped and stood up from her desk. "Sir, you cannot bring police in here," she stammered, reaching for her phone. "We are not here to arrest anyone," the lead deputy announced in a booming voice that echoed off the marble walls. "This property is officially under a court-ordered commercial lockdown due to severe lease violations. Everyone needs to step away from their workstations." The deputies began taping the bright orange eviction notices directly onto the glass security barriers. The bold black letters read, "Notice of commercial eviction and asset seizure." The executive elevator chimed, and the polished steel doors slid open. Valerie marched out, flanked by 2 highly paid corporate defense attorneys. She wore a sharp, tailored crimson suit, and her face was twisted into a mask of absolute outrage. Bradley followed closely behind her, frantically typing on his smartphone, looking entirely panicked. "What is the meaning of this?" Valerie shrieked, her voice cracking with fury as she marched toward the deputies. "I am the chief executive officer of this corporation. You have absolutely no jurisdiction to enter my private facility. Remove those absurd signs immediately, or my legal team will sue the entire department." The lead deputy did not flinch. He handed her a thick legal document. "You do not own this facility, ma'am. The property owner, Ironwood Holdings, has successfully filed a commercial eviction notice for non-payment of rent. You have exactly 2 hours to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. The building, the yard, and all assets currently parked on this soil are officially seized until the delinquent rent and the resulting penalties are paid in full." Valerie snatched the document, staring at the court seal with wide, disbelieving eyes. She looked up and locked eyes with me, standing calmly beside Oliver near the lobby entrance. "You?" she hissed, her pristine corporate facade crumbling completely. "You planned this. You kept that land hidden just to extort me." "I did not hide anything, Valerie," I replied, my voice steady and resonant in the large lobby. "You simply failed to read the lease agreement you inherited in the divorce. You wanted to run an empire, but you refused to understand the foundation it was built on. Now you are trespassing on my property." One of Valerie's corporate lawyers stepped forward, puffing out his chest. Mr. Reyes, this is a gross overreach of the commercial code. You cannot shut down an active logistics network. We will file an emergency injunction by noon and have this order reversed. Oliver smiled his sharp, predatory courtroom smile. You are welcome to try, counselor. But until a judge hears your motion, this property is legally locked. If you attempt to move a single truck off this lot or remove a single computer from that office, the deputies will arrest you for theft of seized assets. The operation is officially dead. Bradley pushed past the lawyers, his face slick with sweat. His eyes were wide and frantic. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You cannot do this, Norman. We have active shipping contracts. If those trucks do not move today, the regional managers will declare a breach of contract. We will lose our entire client base in 24 hours. I looked at my son-in-law, the man who had shoved me to the floor of my squalid apartment and threatened to take away my grandson. I am fully aware of how the supply chain works, Bradley, I stated coldly. That is the exact reason I timed this eviction for a Monday morning. The financial bleeding starts right now. Before Bradley could utter another threat, his smartphone began to ring loudly in the quiet lobby. He looked at the caller ID and his pale face turned completely ashen. It was an emergency call from the board of directors at Apex Solutions, his failing tech startup. He answered the phone, pressing it to his ear with a shaking hand. Yes, he muttered, his voice trembling. I knew exactly why they were calling. Oliver and I had not just filed an eviction notice. We had sent anonymous tips to 3 major financial news outlets detailing the connection between the stolen $2 million retirement fund, the impending logistics collapse, and Bradley's desperate attempt to secure Series A funding. The financial press loves a scandal, and they had just published the story online 5 minutes ago. Bradley listened to the voice on the other end of the line. His knees physically buckled. He leaned heavily against the marble reception desk to keep from collapsing. No, you cannot pull out, he pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. It is a temporary cash flow issue. The land deal is just delayed. Please, you are my lead investors. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the dark screen. They hung up on him. The corporate backers had read the news. They saw the criminal fraud allegations and the seized assets. They immediately dumped their shares and severed all ties to avoid the impending federal investigation. In a matter of seconds, Bradley's tech company lost its entire valuation. His stock plummeted to zero. He was officially ruined. He dropped his phone onto the marble floor. It shattered, sliding across the polished stone. He looked at me, his chest heaving with ragged, uneven breaths. You killed me, he whispered, staring at his hands as if they were covered in blood. You took everything. I took back exactly what you stole, I corrected him, stepping closer so he could hear the absolute finality in my voice. You built your entire life on a foundation of theft and arrogance. I just removed the foundation. Valerie grabbed Bradley's arm, yanking him backward. Stop talking to him, she commanded, her eyes blazing with a dangerous, unhinged desperation. She turned to her lawyers, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. Call Judge Miller immediately. File the emergency medical petition. We are not fighting him in commercial court anymore. Oliver leaned toward me, his expression tightening. She is pivoting, Norman Oliver murmured. They know they cannot beat the real estate eviction. They are going to attack the only vulnerability you have left. Valerie glared at me across the lobby, her polished demeanor entirely replaced by the vicious survival instinct of a cornered predator. You think you are a genius, Norman? She spat, adjusting her expensive coat. But you are just a sick, delusional old man. You have been walking around talking to yourself and making up imaginary corporate conspiracies. You are not fit to manage your own finances, let alone a massive commercial trust. The threat was explicitly clear. Valerie and Bradley were backed into an inescapable corner. Their money was gone, their company was locked down, and their reputation was destroyed. The only way they could possibly regain control of the $15 million land trust was to legally invalidate my capacity to own it. They were going to file a petition to declare me mentally incompetent. They were going to drag me into family court, brand me with severe schizophrenia and dementia, and demand a full conservatorship. If they succeeded, a corrupt judge could assign Valerie as my legal guardian. She would gain total control over Ironwood Holdings, reverse the eviction, and lock me in a psychiatric facility for the rest of my life. The deputies began instructing the warehouse staff to clear the building. Valerie and Bradley retreated toward the glass doors, flanked by their useless attorneys. They walked out into the humid morning air completely stripped of the empire they thought they owned. I stood in the marble lobby listening to the heavy chains being dragged across the front gates of the property. The victory was massive, but the war was far from over. I knew the legal battle that awaited me would be the dirtiest, most treacherous fight of my entire life. They were going to use every piece of fake evidence, every bribed medical professional, and every vicious lie they could invent to destroy my mind in the eyes of the law. I turned to Oliver. Prepare the medical defense. I instructed, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. Let them file their petition. Let them walk into a courtroom and try to call me insane. We are going to let them dig their own graves right in front of a judge. The air conditioning in the Fulton County Courthouse was notoriously freezing, but the cold I felt sitting at the defense table had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the chilling reality of watching my own family attempt to legally erase my entire existence. Oliver Reyes sat beside me, organizing thick manila folders with quiet precision. Across the aisle, Valerie and Kendra sat flanked by 3 expensive corporate litigators. Valerie wore a conservative charcoal suit projecting the perfect image of a deeply concerned ex-wife. Kendra was dressed in muted, modest tones, holding a crumpled tissue and practicing her distressed daughter routine. Bradley sat in the gallery behind them, his face pale and tense. His tech company was entirely bankrupt, his reputation was in ashes, and his corporate investors had fled in terror. But his eyes held a glimmer of desperate, malicious hope. This courtroom was their absolute last resort. If they could convince the judge that I was suffering from severe schizophrenia, they would be granted a full conservatorship. They would gain total control of my life, my medical decisions, and most importantly, Ironwood Holdings and the $15 million commercial lot. Valerie's lead attorney, a tall man with a condescending tone, stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, we are here today to save a man from his own deteriorating mind. Norman Hayes was once a brilliant engineer and a capable businessman. But following the emotional toll of his recent divorce, his mental faculties have collapsed completely. He has succumbed to severe paranoia and dangerous delusions. He is currently living in a squalid, dangerous apartment completely unhoused from reality. He has developed an irrational obsession with his son-in-law, Bradley, accusing him of absurd criminal conspiracies without a single shred of evidence. The lawyer paced in front of the bench, gesturing dramatically toward me. Furthermore, his psychotic break recently led him to illegally lock down his former company's headquarters, causing millions in financial damages. He is a danger to himself and to the community. We are asking the court to grant Valerie Hayes full medical and financial conservatorship before he completely destroys what is left of his life and his estate. The lawyer sat down, looking incredibly satisfied. Valerie dabbed her dry eyes with a handkerchief. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of stone. I did not react. I did not shake my head. I let them build their house of cards as high as possible. The plaintiff called their first star witness. Kendra walked slowly to the witness stand, her shoulders slumped in a masterful display of manufactured grief. She swore on the Bible to tell the truth, and then proceeded to deliver the most calculated string of perjury I had ever witnessed. When the lawyer asked her to describe my recent behavior, Kendra let out a shaky sob. It is heartbreaking, she cried, her voice cracking with perfect theatrical timing. My father is not the man who raised me. He wanders the streets in dirty clothes. He showed up at my house a few weeks ago, completely disoriented, begging for money and talking to people who were not there. I tried to help him. I offered to take him to a doctor, but he became violent and aggressive. He started shouting crazy conspiracy theories about my husband stealing from him. It was terrifying. The lawyer pressed further, asking about the impact on her family. Kendra wiped a perfectly placed tear from her cheek. He even showed up at my son's elementary school play looking like a vagrant, terrifying the children. I had to have security escort him away because he was entirely disconnected from reality. We just want to get him the psychiatric help he so desperately needs. We love him, Your Honor. We cannot just watch him destroy himself. The performance was flawless. She painted me as a tragic, broken vessel, and herself as the long-suffering savior. She took the reality of my undercover investigation, the pool cleaning incident, the school play, humiliation, and twisted them into symptoms of a diseased mind. I looked at the daughter I had paid to put through college, the daughter whose wedding I had financed with my own sweat. She was looking at the judge with wide, innocent eyes, selling my freedom for a piece of real estate. I felt a brief pang of sorrow, not for myself, but for the absolute moral bankruptcy of the child I had raised. Next, the plaintiff called their medical expert, Dr. Philip Harmon. He was a sleek, polished psychiatrist who charged $1,000 an hour for his testimony. He adjusted his expensive glasses and spoke with aggressive clinical authority. "Dr. Harmon, did you have the opportunity to examine Norman Hayes?" the lawyer asked. "I attempted to, Your Honor," Dr. Harmon replied smoothly. However, the respondent was highly uncooperative and exhibited extreme hostility. Therefore, my evaluation is based on comprehensive behavioral reports provided by his immediate family and a detailed review of his recent erratic actions. And what is your professional diagnosis, doctor? Based on the documented history of paranoid delusions, unprovoked aggression toward family members, and the irrational sabotage of commercial assets, I have diagnosed Mr. Hayes with late-onset schizophrenia accompanied by severe paranoid ideation. He lacks the executive function required to manage his own finances or medical care. I strongly recommend immediate institutionalization in a secure psychiatric facility and the appointment of a legal conservator. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience on the bench, frowned as she took extensive notes. The weight of a medical professional diagnosing me with schizophrenia was a heavy blow. The legal threshold for conservatorship relied heavily on expert medical testimony, and Valerie had clearly paid top dollar to secure a damning psychiatric profile. The courtroom felt suffocatingly tense. Bradley smirked from the gallery. Valerie subtly adjusted her posture, radiating the quiet confidence of a woman who believed she had just won the war and secured her $15 million. It was Oliver's turn. He stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not look intimidated. He looked like a hunter who had just watched his prey step directly into a snare. Dr. Harmon Oliver began pacing slowly in front of the witness stand. "You just diagnosed my client with severe schizophrenia and recommended locking him in a psychiatric ward for the rest of his life." "That is correct," the doctor replied defensively, lifting his chin. "And yet you have never actually conducted a physical or psychological examination of Norman Hayes yourself, have you?" Oliver asked, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "Your entire diagnosis is based entirely on the hearsay of the very people who stand to inherit $15 million if my client is declared incompetent." The plaintiff's attorney jumped up from his seat, objecting loudly. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying and badgering the witness." "Sustained," the judge said, looking at Oliver with a warning glare. "Move on, Mr. Reyes." Oliver smiled an icy, confident smile and returned to the defense table. He had accomplished his goal. He had exposed the core flaw in their medical testimony for the judge to consider. The foundation of their lies was already beginning to crack under the slightest pressure. "I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor," Oliver announced, sitting back down beside me. The judge looked down from her elevated bench, surveying the room. "Mr. Reyes, does the defense have any witnesses to call?" Oliver looked at me and nodded. The moment we had meticulously planned for had finally arrived. The moment where I would step out of the shadows and tear their fabricated reality to shreds. "Yes, Your Honor," Oliver said, his voice ringing with absolute crystal clarity. "The defense calls Norman Hayes to the stand." I stood up from the defense table. I did not wear a faded flannel shirt or scuffed work boots today. I was dressed in a meticulously tailored dark navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. My posture was perfectly straight, my shoulders broad, and my expression carved from solid granite. I did not look like a broken old man suffering from dementia. I looked exactly like the corporate titan who had built an empire from the ground up. I walked toward the witness stand with calm, measured steps, ready to drop the hammer and watch my family burn in the flames of their own deceit. I took the oath, placing my hand on the Bible. The courtroom was dead silent. Oliver Reyes approached the stand holding 3 thick manila folders. "Mr. Hayes." Oliver began, his voice projecting absolute authority. "The plaintiffs claim you are suffering from severe late-onset schizophrenia and cognitive decline. How do you respond to these allegations?" I looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I am a systems engineer who built a logistics empire. My mind is my greatest asset. I would never let it deteriorate." Oliver handed the first folder to the bailiff to pass to the judge. Your Honor, I am submitting medical evaluations from 3 independent board-certified psychiatrists, including the chief of neurology at Emory University Hospital. All 3 evaluations conducted within the last 48 hours conclude that Norman Hayes possesses exceptional cognitive function and exhibits absolutely 0 signs of paranoia, schizophrenia, or dementia. The plaintiff's attorney shot up from his chair, objecting wildly, but the judge silenced him with a sharp bang of her gavel. Valerie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her expensive facade was beginning to sweat. Oliver did not stop. He pulled out the second folder. Furthermore, Your Honor, the plaintiffs claim my client is incapable of managing his finances. However, we have forensic evidence proving that his finances were actively being stolen. Oliver presented the forged corporate seal and the digital wire transfer logs tracking the $2 million directly from my private retirement fund into Bradley's failing tech startup. We have sworn testimony from a forensic document examiner confirming the corporate seal used on the asset waiver was a digital forgery. Valerie Hayes and Bradley orchestrated a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud. The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. Bradley turned ash white in the gallery. But I was not finished. The final nail in their coffin was ready. Your Honor, Oliver said, pulling out a tablet and a small projector. The plaintiffs claim my client is a violent, paranoid man. We would like to submit Defense Exhibit C, which demonstrates exactly who the violent party is. Oliver played the video from my hidden alarm clock camera. The high-definition footage lit up the courtroom wall. Every person in the room watched Bradley kick down my apartment door. They watched him hurl racist insults. They watched him grab me by the throat and slam me against the wall. But worst of all for Kendra, they heard Bradley's crystal-clear audio confession. They heard him brag about his 6-month affair. They heard him detail his plan to steal the $15 million land trust, abandon his wife, and flee to Paris with another woman. The video ended, leaving a suffocating, heavy silence in the courtroom. The judge stared at the blank screen, her face flush with absolute outrage. Kendra sat frozen at the plaintiff's table. She slowly turned her head to look back at Bradley in the gallery. Her eyes were wide with pure, horrifying realization. The man she had defended, the man she had chosen over her own father, had just confessed to using her as a disposable pawn on a high-definition recording. Bradley jumped out of his seat, looking frantically toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. He took exactly 1 step before the judge's voice cracked through the room like a whip. "Bailiff, secure that man immediately. Do not let him leave this room." 2 armed court officers moved with lightning speed, intercepting Bradley before he could reach the exit. They grabbed his arms and slammed him face first against the heavy oak doors. The sound of metal handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed perfectly. "Let me go," Bradley yelled, struggling uselessly against the officers. "That video is manipulated. He set me up." The judge banged her gavel so hard the wooden block nearly cracked. "Bradley, you are currently under arrest for assault, battery, and elder abuse. And based on the financial documents submitted to this court, I am immediately forwarding this entire transcript to the district attorney and the FBI for federal wire fraud investigation." The judge turned her furious gaze toward Valerie. "As for this petition for conservatorship, it is completely and utterly dismissed with prejudice. I have never seen a more despicable abusive manipulation of the family court system. Mrs. Hayes, you are incredibly lucky I do not hold you in contempt of court right this second. Your assets are officially frozen pending the federal fraud investigation." Valerie collapsed back into her chair. Her perfectly styled hair fell out of place. She gasped for air, clutching her chest as her entire stolen empire disintegrated in front of a gallery of spectators. She was completely, utterly ruined. But Valerie was a survivor. Even as the courtroom emptied and Bradley was dragged away in handcuffs, she was already calculating her next desperate move. She knew her personal bank accounts would be frozen within hours, but the logistics company servers and hardware were still physically sitting in a secondary warehouse facility, not yet seized by the eviction notice. I knew exactly what she was going to do. Later that afternoon, I sat in Oliver's office watching a live feed from a security camera I had installed in that secondary facility years ago. Valerie walked into the server room, flanked by a sleazy-looking liquidator carrying a clipboard. She was trying to sell the massive mainframe computers and the proprietary routing software off the books for quick, untraceable cash. She needed a getaway fund. These servers contain the most advanced logistics routing algorithms in the state, Valerie told the buyer. her voice shaking with desperate urgency. "I will sell the entire hardware setup and the software licenses to you right now for $500,000 cash." The buyer looked impressed. He reached into his briefcase to pull out a contract. I picked up my laptop and typed a final sequence of commands. I had built that software. I owned the core copyright independently of the divorce decree. I pressed the enter key, executing a complete system wipe and activation lock. In the security video, Valerie's buyer walked over to the main terminal to inspect the software. Suddenly, every single monitor in the massive server room flickered and went entirely black. A bright red warning box appeared on every screen simultaneously. The text was large and undeniable. "Copyright Norman Hayes, system locked. Unauthorized access detected, license expired." The buyer stared at the screens and then looked at Valerie with absolute disgust. "You do not even own the software licenses," he snapped, throwing his clipboard into his briefcase. "You are trying to sell me dead metal. I am out of here." He stormed out of the server room. Valerie fell to her knees on the cold, anti-static floor, screaming in frustration. She slammed her fists against the useless black servers. I closed my laptop. The digital blow was complete. She had absolutely nothing left to sell. She was entirely trapped. 2 weeks passed. The fallout from the courtroom revelation was swift and utterly merciless. The bank discovered the fraudulent mortgages Bradley had taken out to fund his failing tech startup. With Bradley sitting in a federal holding cell and their assets frozen, the bank immediately foreclosed on the multi-million-dollar mansion. I was drinking my morning coffee in my new luxury penthouse suite overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The Ironwood commercial lot sale had officially closed, depositing $20 million into my private trust. The concierge of my building called my private line. "Mr. Hayes, there is a woman down here causing a scene. She says she is your daughter." I told the concierge to send her up. I opened my mahogany double doors. Kendra stood in the hallway. She looked completely broken. She was wearing sweatpants and a dirty shirt. She dragged 2 large suitcases behind her, holding my grandson Leo by the hand. Leo looked tired and scared. Kendra dropped her bags and fell to her knees right in the hallway, sobbing uncontrollably. "Dad, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. The bank locked us out. Bradley's lawyers took all my jewelry for retainer fees. I have absolutely zero money. We slept in the car last night. "Please, Dad. I am so sorry. I was wrong about everything. Let us move in with you. I will do anything." I looked down at the daughter who had discarded me like trash. I looked at the little boy holding her hand. I knelt down gently, ignoring Kendra entirely, and looked Leo in the eyes. "Leo, I love you very much," I told my grandson, handing him a shiny new tablet I had bought for him. "Go sit on that big leather couch inside and play a game for a minute. Grandpa needs to talk to your mother." Leo nodded and ran inside. I stood back up and looked down at Kendra. My face was completely devoid of sympathy. "I have already set up an irrevocable educational and housing trust for Leo," I stated, my voice icy and precise. "His future is completely secure. He will attend the best schools, and he will never go hungry. But that trust is administered by an independent legal board. You do not get to touch a single penny of it." Kendra looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "But Dad, what about me? Where am I supposed to go?" I looked at her with the exact same expression she had given me on the day of my eviction. I leaned forward, delivering the final, devastating blow. "Look at yourself, Kendra. You have no money. You have no house. You have no power. You are a failure." I paused, letting the weight of the moment crush her completely. "Nobody will ever want you again." I turned my back on her and walked into my penthouse, closing the heavy doors and leaving her sobbing alone in the hallway. The justice system moved efficiently when presented with irrefutable digital evidence. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse to witness the final sentencing. Bradley, wearing a faded orange jumpsuit, stood before the judge looking completely hollowed out. He was found guilty of multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate forgery, and severe elder abuse. The judge showed absolutely zero leniency. Bradley was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. He looked back at me as the bailiffs led him away in chains, but I did not offer him a single reaction. He was a ghost to me now. Valerie avoided prison time by cooperating with the federal investigators and turning over all remaining evidence against Bradley. However, the civil courts were not as forgiving. The judge ordered massive financial restitution for the damages she caused to the logistics company workers and the fraudulent legal fees. Valerie was left completely bankrupt. Stripped of her corporate titles and her luxury penthouse, she was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment in the exact same decaying building she had once forced me to live in. To satisfy her court-ordered debt payments, she took the only job she could get. She now works the night shift as a janitor cleaning the floors of a corporate office building downtown. The ultimate poetic justice for a woman who thought she was a queen. As for Kendra, she proved unfit to provide a stable environment for my grandson. With Oliver's brilliant legal maneuvering, I successfully petitioned the family court for full legal guardianship of Leo. I moved him into my penthouse and enrolled him in a prestigious private academy. Every weekend, we build model airplanes in my new state-of-the-art workshop, just like we used to. I look out over the Atlanta skyline from my balcony holding a glass of aged scotch. I lost my marriage, and I lost my daughter. But I gained back my dignity, my empire, and the chance to raise my grandson right. Kindness is not a weakness, but if someone ever mistakes my silence for stupidity, they will learn exactly how ruthless an architect can be when he decides to dismantle the building. If you have ever had to cut toxic people out of your life to protect your peace, let me know in the comments below. Stay strong and never let anyone dictate your worth. After my divorce, I lost everything: my home, my savings, and my dignity. But it was my daughter's words that broke me completely. She looked me in the eye and said, "Nobody will ever want you again." Those words shattered me, but they also ignited something deep inside. You will regret saying that I promised myself, determined to prove her wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The final signature required exactly 5 seconds. I sat at the head of a massive polished oak table inside the sleek downtown offices of Horizon Development Group. 3 months ago, the executives in this room had looked at me as if I were a homeless vagrant who had wandered into their private dining room by mistake. Today, they looked at me with absolute, unvarnished respect. The lead developer, a man who managed billions in urban real estate, slid the heavy leather-bound contract across the table toward me. Beside the contract sat a certified bank confirmation. $20 million had just been irrevocably wired into the private accounts of Ironwood Holdings. The sale of the 4-acre commercial lot was officially complete. I placed my gold fountain pen down on the table. It was the exact same pen Bradley had attempted to use when he thought he was stealing my legacy. I had taken it from the restaurant that night, a small personal trophy of his failure. The lead developer stood up and extended his hand. "It has been a genuine privilege doing business with a man of your caliber. Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice carrying a tone of deep professional admiration. "You play a brilliant game of chess." I stood up and shook his hand firmly. "It was never a game," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "It was simply pest control." I walked out of the corporate high-rise and stepped into the warm, fading light of the Atlanta afternoon. I did not call a luxury town car or a private chauffeur. I walked down into the parking garage and climbed into the cab of my rusted pickup truck. The faded paint and the grinding engine were a permanent reminder of where I had come from and the squalor my own family had tried to condemn me to. As I navigated through the heavy city traffic, my cell phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from the wealth management firm handling my grandson Leo's trust. The first massive deposit had just cleared. Leo's future, his education, his housing, and his eventual business capital were completely secured behind an impenetrable fortress of legal protections. Neither Valerie nor Kendra would ever be able to touch a single cent of it. The toxic cycle of our family was officially, permanently broken. The sun was beginning to set when I arrived back at my penthouse. The sky over the city turned a brilliant, bruised shade of purple and orange, casting long shadows across the towering skyscrapers. I took the private elevator up to the top floor. The heavy mahogany doors opened to reveal a sanctuary of quiet, modern elegance. I walked past the state-of-the-art kitchen and the massive living room where Leo had been playing earlier. He was currently fast asleep in his new bedroom, clutching a wooden model airplane we had built together the night before. The house was peaceful. It was the kind of deep, resonant peace that only comes after a brutal, exhausting war. I walked out onto the expansive wrap-around rooftop terrace. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on below, stretching out like a massive, glowing grid. The cool evening breeze carried the faint, distant hum of the highway. I stood by the glass railing, resting my hands on the cool metal, taking a deep, slow breath. The heavy glass door behind me slid open. Oliver Reyes stepped out onto the terrace. He had removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, looking like a man who had just won the defining case of his entire legal career. He carried a silver tray holding a crystal decanter of 30-year-old single malt scotch and 2 heavy tumbler glasses. "I let myself in," Norman Oliver said, walking over to a low outdoor table and setting the tray down. "The doorman knows me by now. I figured a $20 million closing deserved something slightly better than the cheap coffee at my clinic." I turned away from the skyline and walked over to the table. "You earned this drink, Oliver," I said, taking a seat in one of the plush outdoor chairs. "You fought a flawless battle." Oliver poured the rich amber liquid into the 2 crystal glasses. The sound of the liquor splashing against the glass was incredibly satisfying. He handed me a glass and took a seat across from me. He looked out at the glittering expanse of the city, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. "I have represented a lot of victims in my career," Norman Oliver said, his voice quiet and reflective. "I have seen families tear each other apart for a few $1,000s. I have seen greedy children throw their parents into state-run facilities just to steal the equity in their homes. Most of those victims just surrender. They let the betrayal crush their spirit until there is nothing left. But you," he paused, taking a slow sip of the scotch, "you let them think they had killed you. You let them dance on your grave while you silently bought the cemetery." I swirled the heavy liquor in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the ambient light. It tasted of smoke oak and survival. "I did not do this out of malice, Oliver," I replied, keeping my gaze focused on the horizon. "I did not destroy them because I enjoyed it. I dismantled them because it was an absolute necessity." I leaned back in the chair, letting the exhaustion of the past year finally settle into my bones. Valerie, Kendra, and Bradley operated on a very specific, completely flawed philosophy. They believed that kindness was synonymous with weakness. They believed that because I stayed quiet, because I worked in the shadows, because I wore work boots instead of designer suits, I was a fundamentally inferior creature. They thought my patience was stupidity. I took a slow, burning sip of the scotch. But they forgot the cardinal rule of architecture. I continued, my voice dropping to a low, steady rumble. "The man who designs the foundation knows exactly where the stress points are. He knows exactly which structural pillars to remove to make the entire building collapse into dust." Valerie thought she stole a logistics empire. She never realized she was just renting space in my world. Oliver chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "They built their entire house of cards on the assumption that you would never fight back. That is the ultimate irony of arrogant predators," I noted, setting my glass down on the glass table. "They always construct their own traps. I did not have to invent any evidence against them. I did not have to lie in a courtroom. I simply handed them the rope and watched them tie the noose around their own necks." Bradley ruined his own company with his reckless spending. Valerie destroyed her own leverage by assuming she was untouchable. Kendra severed her own lifeline by choosing a fraudulent husband over a loyal father. The universe has a flawless accounting system, Oliver. Call it karma, call it the law of cause and effect, or call it divine justice. Whatever the name, the mechanism is always the same. The bill always comes due. We sat in companionable silence for a long time, watching the cars move like tiny glowing ants on the highways below. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing. I thought about Valerie scrubbing floors in a downtown office building, forced to perform the exact manual labor she had always mocked. I thought about Bradley sitting in a federal penitentiary, stripped of his tailored suits and his tech bro arrogance, staring at cinder block walls. I thought about Kendra working a graveyard shift, living in a squalid apartment, finally understanding the true value of a single dollar. I did not feel sorry for them. Empathy is a gift reserved for those who possess a conscience. I had spent 40 years giving them everything, and they had tried to bury me alive. The justice they received was perfectly calibrated to the sins they committed. I picked up my glass and raised it toward Oliver. "To the truth," I said simply. "To the truth," Oliver replied, clinking his crystal glass against mine. The sharp, resonant sound echoed beautifully across the rooftop terrace. I finished my drink and stood up, walking back over to the glass railing. The city of Atlanta spread out before me, a vast network of lights, roads, and endless possibilities. I was 69 years old. Society often dictates that a man my age should be fading quietly into the background, preparing for the end. But as I looked out over the empire I had reclaimed, I realized my life was not ending. It had just been aggressively, violently rebooted. I had a grandson sleeping safely in the room behind me, A boy who would grow up learning the value of hard work, the necessity of moral integrity, and the absolute importance of standing your ground. I had $20 million in a secure trust. I had my health, my freedom, and my sanity. I had survived the absolute worst betrayal a man could experience, and I had emerged completely victorious. The night sky was completely clear, displaying a scattered canvas of bright stars above the city glare. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, crisp air of total independence. I had lost a deeply toxic marriage, and I had lost an incredibly ungrateful daughter. But in exchange, I had won back the most vital, essential piece of my existence. I had won back myself. If you are listening to this story, I want you to remember one crucial, absolute truth. Never allow anyone to dictate your worth. Never let toxic family members, manipulative partners, or arrogant predators convince you that your kindness is a vulnerability. Compassion is a choice, but self-respect is a fundamental requirement. If someone attempts to strip you of your dignity, if they mistake your quiet patience for submission, do not waste your breath screaming. Do not throw tantrums, and do not beg for mercy. Retreat into the shadows, gather your strength, build your strategy, and when the perfect moment arrives, tear their entire stolen world to the ground. Have you ever had to cut deeply toxic family members out of your life to protect your own peace and sanity? Have you ever had to watch the law of karma deliver absolute justice to someone who tried to destroy you? I want to read your stories. Share your experiences in the comments below and let us build a community of people who refuse to be broken. If you found value in my journey, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of survival, justice, and absolute resilience. Stay strong, stay sharp, and never ever let them see you coming. With deep respect and solidarity, until the next story. Another profound lesson I took away from this ordeal is the undeniable power of silence and emotional discipline. We live in a world that constantly rewards the loudest voice in the room, a world where people confuse flashy displays of wealth with actual intelligence. But real strength is quiet. When you are betrayed, your first instinct is to scream, to demand fairness, and to fight back immediately. Instead of giving them the reaction they wanted, I chose to observe, document, and prepare. Silence is not surrender. It is the most effective shield you can build while you are sharpening your sword. If you have ever used silence to outsmart someone who tried to destroy you, share your victory in the comments below.